All right. This is it. You've trained so hard for this. You got it. Don't let anybody psych you out. They told you you'd never make it, but here you are. You only failed twice. Only failed out of the academy twice, but you made it.
Gunhead Starfighter is control. You're cleared for takeoff. Runway 27 left.
Clear for takeoff. Gunhead Starfighter.
Gunhead Starfighter Earth Control. Enemy Bungo Box. Vectors for intercept 090 Mark 220.
Bungo box. Vector 3536. Shit. Vector. Wait, what the hell is that? Oh my god! Alright. Tower. Shit. Respawn, please.
Gunhead Starfighter Earth Control. I check you've respawned. New enemy, Mr. Twister. Vectors for intercept 070 Mark 170.
Copy that, Tower. Mr. Twister. Okay. Alright. Not gonna fuck this up again. And I see him. He's coming. Oh shit! Tower. Respawn. Please. Respawn.
Gunhead Starfighter Earth Control. I check you've respawned. I have to be honest with you, sir. This is the first level of Blazing Lasers. I don't think it's that hard. Enemy, Bungo Box again. Vectors for intercept 050 Mark 210.
Friggin' Bungo Box. Kill this thing. Oh, I see him. Just gotta get him in my sights. Fire! Oh shit, I missed! Oh fuck! Tower, I need a respawn, please. Thank you.
Gunhead Starfighter Earth Control. I'm afraid we're all out of credits. It appears Skuldor and the Dark Squadron will be victorious. They're going to flay the flesh from our bones and force our women to do simple accounting, not even complex accounting, really torturous, simple accounting, not even on Microsoft Excel, on Lotus 123. Great job.
I knew I should have been a Thunder Force pilot. Welcome to the Region Free Gamers Podcast, everybody. I am so hyped. I've just entered the cockpit of my Patreon-funded space fighter, equipped with a couple of giant lightning guns so I can blast through traffic on my morning commute. To my direct left is Paul, sitting in his mech, designed to look like a Japanese Ronin, despite the fact that it was designed and built in Canada. And to our right, piloting a redesigned World War II fighter plane, somehow designed to shoot 8 bullets at once in several different directions, is our special guest and Shmup Junkie, Ilya, a.k.a. Turbo Thunder 16, a.k.a. the Shmup Junkie on YouTube. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm ready.
Good. And how are you doing, Paul? I forgot to ask you as you were mounting your mech, so I didn't want to distract you.
We have a shiny guest, and then I just become chopped liver. I like this.
Yeah. As if it was any different when there wasn't a shiny guest on the show.
I'm doing great, man. I'm super hyped. I'm glad you gave me the Ronin mech. I have like 27 different weapon combinations. It's sweet.
I know. I decided to make it less problematic than all the G Gundam mechs we discussed last time on the show. So we've all gathered here today to save the Earth from subpar shooter games by talking about one of the best developers in the genre, Compile. I'm very excited. We've been planning an episode like this for forever, so I'm very excited. Not only that we're finally talking about it, but that we got somebody like Ilya to walk us through. And since he's the expert here, obviously I need him to know that I brought him on here just to sort of back up all of the incorrect things that I'm going to share with all of our listeners. I don't want any pushback. I'm not looking for corrections here. Just support. So if that's okay with you, I'm sure we can continue on.
I'll make sure to not correct you if you say something wrong.
There we go. This is. I asked this of all our guests. This is why I am the most correct podcaster of all time. But before we get started, obviously, a quick thank you to all our Patreons, without whom we could not have funded all these insane combat vehicle purchases for ourselves and for our guests. We always like to give back as well. If you enjoy the show, please feel free to support us financially for more terrible decisions such as this. Otherwise, please feel free to follow us on our socials, Twitter and Instagram, join our Discord, or leave us a review on your podcast platform of choice. Now, we're going to obviously get into a lot of shooter talk, but Ilya, this is your first time on the show, And as a little bit of a tradition, whenever we have somebody new on the show, we interrogate them viciously about their gaming opinions, their memories, their likes, dislikes, and then we tell them whether they're correct or not.
He's sweating already.
Can't see it under the beanie.
Exactly. So I just wanted to start off where we always start off. What was the first console you ever owned, and what are some of your first gaming memories?
Oh gosh. Well, I'm old, so first console I ever owned was an Atari 2600. Okay. I don't know how much it counts because I was so young. I was probably 3 to 4 years old. When I got my 2600. So, my earliest memories are of me getting my ass kicked by Defender on the 2600, which is probably the first shmup I ever played, which I really don't wish on anybody. Not that it's not a great game. It's just, if you ever played Defender, that's a pretty damn hard game to play when you're 3 years old.
I was about to say, Defender's actually pretty good. Like, the 2600 is not known for software that has aged well, but Defender's not bad.
Oh yeah, it's a fantastic game. It's just not fantastic when you're trying to get anywhere at 4.
Sure, yeah.
So, I got thrown into the fire pretty early when it came to that. And I said I don't remember a lot with my 2600 besides, playing games like that and Jungle Hunt and the usual Frogger. But really, my first love where I really got into gaming, that I remember was with the NES. Like a lot of people during that time, because I was then a little bit older and I could enjoy all of those games. And I can actually physically remember, what I was playing and how much I enjoyed them and what I played them with. Whereas when I think back to, how much do you remember when you were 3?
Yeah,
exactly.
3 to 5. So.
Yeah, it really seems like whenever, myself included, whenever you ask somebody, like, what's your first gaming memory? It's not even, it's like barely a memory. It's like, I remember looking at something or touching something or like being like vaguely involved in a game. And then like several years later, it's like I fell in love with it. Like I rediscovered it through something else. So that makes a ton of sense.
Well, what I really do remember is I remember walking to the Thrifty because I lived in Oakland and there was like a Thrifty up the street. That they don't have anymore, where they had the ice cream. I think they still do have the ice cream now, the Rite Aids. So that was the thing. I would look forward to going to Thrifty with my grandparents. I wanted a new Atari game, whatever it was that I was going to buy. I wanted to see what they had. So it was always about checking out the games. Maybe I get something, and all about that like cheap scoop of ice cream. That's what I remember more than anything. But we still do that. Thrifty ice cream is awesome if you ever had it. So I still search out Rite Aid so I can go and find like that cherry flavor that I remember from when I was like 4.
Nice.
There we go. Yeah, it's always about like my earliest gaming memories are like that. It's tied less to the actual game. It's more about like what was I doing or who I was with. What was like there's something involved with the game. Like I remember going to Toys R Us with my mom. I remember walking the aisles and stuff like that. And then playing the game was like secondary to that as far as everything else is concerned. And obviously you've sort of become a content creator that's, you have a pretty specific singular focus on shooters, shmups, shoot 'em ups. I don't know what your preferred terminology is there. STGs. Where did that start? Like, what was the first sort of shooter that you remember really grabbing you and really pulling you into this genre?
I played a lot of, like everybody else, I played a lot of Life Force and Gradius on the NES because it was such a good game and it was so well done. Back around then, I wasn't really into shooters or shmups. I wasn't into anything in particular. I just liked playing games, whatever they were. We didn't think about it that way. So with the NES, it was all about platformers. We all played Contra and we all played, Vania and Mario and everything else.
Yeah.
But when a really great game came along, like Life Force, it was just something we played with friends. So, if I think back to like my earliest memories of playing shooting games I enjoyed, it kind of started there. And then, other NES games that I played, down the line after that. But I never really considered myself specifically into shooters. Like, oh my God, I always go out of my way to look for them until more like the late 80s, early 90s, where I started playing the TurboGrafx because it was such a shooter console. Yeah. It was Blazing Lasers, Gunhead, that kind of started that, where the game blew me away. And then once I enjoyed it so much, I started to actively seek out, okay, what other games can I find that are like this, to play?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're a much braver and adventurous man than I played shooters when I was young, and I was definitely afraid of them. They punished me like no other game. The risk, the reward that I was feeling from them was not as large as I would get. Like the dopamine hit was not as good as I would get from other games where I was more successful. But and we'll talk about this, but everything around the shooter kept pulling me back in to continue getting punished. It was very much like a trap for me when I was younger.
Yep. No, because they're so visually appealing, right? Like,
exactly.
If you see one, I remember as a kid, like you walk into the game store and the attract screen, if it's a shoot 'em up, there's just so much shit going on. Like it looks great, it's attractive, you want to play it. And then you get destroyed, but whatever. We had infinite time back then. It was fine.
Even in arcades, like, simpler. I mean, obviously there was always like the 1942s and your more complex shooters, but I was always a big Galaga guy.
Oh yeah.
And I was never very good at it, but every time I walked into an arcade, I was like, I gotta play Galaga. Like, look at it. It sounds good. It looks amazing. Like, I like that it sucks up my ship, and then I can blow it up and get 2 ships, and now I feel like I rule the world, man.
Dude,
like,
you're not alone, man.
I've never felt more powerful.
Yeah, the way some people talk about, like some people I know, the way they talk about Galaga, the tone of reverence they have. I was never really that into it myself, but there are people who swear by that game.
Yeah, we'll get into it. But let me ask you, Ilya, once you started getting into shooters themselves, like once you, like in that TurboGrafx era and beyond, when you really found a love for the genre and you were really like focusing in on it, did you find yourself like sort of drifting towards specific types of shooters? As far as I know, there's vertical shooters, horizontal shooters, bullet hells, different sort of things like that. Do you have a preferred type of shooter? And by the same token, is there a type of shooter that you try to avoid or don't like as much generally?
Well, I guess going far enough back, there weren't really many different types of shooters.
Yeah.
I think back to TurboGrafx PC Engine, there was really vertical and horizontal shooters. There wasn't much of anything else. There was no such thing as bullet hell. Or anything. So you just kind of played what looked interesting or what looked cool. Because, Blazing Lasers was so, it affected so many other games like the Soldier series and everything else. I certainly would actively seek out games that looked similar, that looked cool. But I wasn't, that discerning in that sense. I mean, if it came out and it looked awesome, whether it was Thunder Force or, whatever, I would play it. But yeah, so I was actively seeking out games to buy or rent or anything that I could find that was that type of game. Of course, I played everything. I mean, I focus my channel on shooters, and sometimes I diversify it a bit. But, I definitely would say that between shooters and platformers, like many of us, those are the games that I probably played the most.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say, what was your sort of next favorite genre when you need to decompress from gripping the controller while trying to avoid bullets?
Yeah, there was no decompression. I mean, platformers were equally hard.
Yeah.
Or maybe not equally hard, but if you go back far enough to like the NES days, there were some real bastards. So,
yeah.
You could pick your poison at that point. Things got a lot more reasonable around the 16-bit era. The platformers weren't quite as, broken and unfair in some ways as they were back in the 8-bit days. Which is, I guess it was kind of like trial by fire. We grew up playing some of those broken games and, we got good at it. So, it made the future games a lot easier. But yeah, so there was no particular type. I maybe looked for certain developers, but if it looked cool, I would play it. I would
sure.
It's a philosophy to live by. One that I try to apply to my current gaming purchases right now.
Yep.
If it looks interesting, fuck it, let's try it.
Yeah, regardless of
you never
genre.
know what you're going to find.
Yeah.
I guess the last thing I want to ask you, since I may not get the opportunity otherwise, is Paul is a shmup devotee already. He believes, he has found the light.
Hallelujah.
I myself am sort of, I'm sort of on the edge. I dip my toe in every once in a while. Are there any shmups that are like personal favorites of yours that you recommend to people when they're trying to get into the genre? Like, are there any like good old standards that you're like, if you want to learn about this, if you want to like sort of try to get into it, these are the ones that you should definitely check out?
Yeah, and I guess the first question I always ask is, what type are you looking to get into? Because now there are different types, and I try to find something that is a good game and it's fun, but it's also reasonably entry level enough to where you can get your feet wet, because a lot of them are arcade based, so they're incredibly hard.
Yeah.
So you can say, oh yeah, go play Gradius 2 or, or play R-Type. But I mean, for a first time player, I mean, you're excited about it because it's a cool game, but at the same time, it just destroys you and there's not much you can do about it. And that's kind of where Compile comes in, because Compile was a console based developer. Compile didn't make arcade games like Konami and Capcom. That wasn't their background.
Yep.
So they purposefully made games that were more oriented toward the average mass, the audience of console gamers. So the games initially were not as hard. And that's a good thing. So I actually do recommend Compile games to a lot of people that are trying to get into it, because that's what they're meant for, especially some of the later games like Blazing Lazers. It's a good game to start out with for that reason, as long as it's the kind of game that you like. If you're looking for the older type of old school shooter, Compile made some really good ones. If you're looking for vertical games for that reason, because they were console based versus arcade. Nice.
What better place to start, right? What better promo for what we're about to talk about?
I'm saying.
And before, I don't mean to dilly-dally any longer, but I was curious about one thing as you were talking about some of these older games. What's the status, or what's the scene look like now for modern shooters? Like, is if you're getting into this genre now, are you sort of tied to a lot of the older games and you definitely need to go back, or is there enough new games coming out now that people can start fresh there?
It's kind of a mix of both. Most of the new games that come out now are more indie based games, because it's a smaller genre. You don't have big AAA studios making those games anymore like you used to. They're just not doing that. Because there's not a big enough market for it. It would be nice if there was. But there has become a big enough market for it where there's a ton of re-releases. So, shmups have kind of had a bit of a renaissance where you have all these old games coming back, and old Toaplan games getting re-released, and M2 releasing old games. So it's a really good time to get into it, because there's a lot of that where you don't have to go back and play them on, on the NES or the Mega Drive or the Turbo or the Saturn. You can play them on the Switch or the PS4.
Yeah.
Because, the Aleste games are getting re-released, or Cotton, or anything that's popular right now. Yep. And a lot of the cave games. So if you're looking for new games that you've just never heard of, because you're already into the genre, there's a lot of indie games that are coming out. And if you're someone that is new and wants to get into it but haven't played a lot, it's a good time, because there's a lot of re-releases on modern consoles like the Arcade Archives, where you can get into that.
Yep.
Yeah, that's perfect. I mean, I'm not going to lie. Part of the reason I was also hesitant to get into the genre when I did is because I sort of missed the boat. And, when you see a game that looks as cool as Musha, but then you see the price tag attached to that game.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, man, what am I even doing here,
Yeah.
But you make a good point that now that, a lot of these companies are saying, hey, some people might actually like these video game things. Maybe we should do them up again and make them nice and pretty and make them accessible. That I don't think it's ever been easier to get into some of these older games than right now, especially with, like you said, the Switch and the PS4 getting all these remasters and ports and whatnot.
Yeah,
you have the mini consoles, you have emulation, you have the Mister. I mean, there's a million different ways to play these games now.
There has been no better time, like not since the mid 90s has there been a better time to be a fan of shmups, honestly. Like it's so great. The accessibility now is like unheard of. It's fantastic.
Yeah. Since Paul was trying to convince all his friends to purchase a TurboGrafx 16, there has not been a better time.
I wasn't trying to do that. I loved my Turbo Duo, but I was smart enough to I wasn't going up to a guy with an SNES and being like, yo, you need to get this Turbo Duo and ditch that SNES. Even I knew that was stupid.
Well, in some ways you were kind of proud that you had this cool system that a lot of other people didn't. There was like a bit of pride of ownership there.
For sure.
You had something that a lot of other people didn't, and that was like a secret.
Yep. And variety too. Like, because I had a Turbo Duo and my friends had SNESs and Genesai, we were able to just like swap systems, like I would lend people out my Turbo Duo, power cable, everything, right? We'd do that for a couple weeks and play all the games we wanted to play. It's how all my friends got to play Rondo way back when, right? Mm-hmm. And I got to play Final Fantasy VI and Chrono Trigger, so everybody was happy.
Can I borrow your Turbo Duo and I'll send you my 3DO?
No.
Oh, shit.
Arnie, we live in an age now where I don't even have to do that anymore.
I know. You could just play whatever you want, man.
Yeah.
Cause of Redacted. You can just go on your computer and do redacted things to we don't
endorse any of these things.
We don't discuss any of that on this podcast.
Well, you have official ways to do it now. You got the mini console.
Exactly.
That's right. Exactly. All right. So, enough pussyfooting around. Let's get to Compile, man.
Arnie, I'm excited. Just to pussyfoot a little bit longer. Damn it, Paul. Did you actually end up getting the Turbo Mini?
No, I did not. I fucked around and I found out, as the kids would say nowadays. And now it's quite expensive.
Yeah, now it's quite expensive.
See, I didn't do my job. See, the whole reason I started my channel was to do PC Engine Mini reviews to get as many people to buy them as possible.
Yeah.
So everyone knew. And obviously I didn't do a good enough job because he didn't pick one up.
Yeah, you missed someone.
You will learn that my financial decisions are not good. I tend to pass on things that end up being worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I very eagerly buy things that become worthless. So I should have known, because I was like, oh, they did the Genesis one, and I'm still seeing that in stores.
I know.
And I'm like, oh, this TurboGrafx one, nobody's gonna want this. I foolishly thought the market is not there for this. I'll be able to snag one. And of course, by then the hype beast had gotten to it, and it was probably like half sold to scalpers by the time it even hit market. And they even made 3 different versions for me. They tried to warn me. They tried to do me a favor, and I just didn't listen. I fucked up.
I think so. Our buddy Ryan, living in bits, he's on our Discord. I think he got the PC Engine Mini pretty recently at a reasonable price.
Yeah.
Just saying, that might actually end up being the way to go.
You can. Amazon Japan is where you want to look for them, because they still come up from time to time.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's where I got mine, and they're not being scalped there. They're reasonable.
Oh,
so,
good.
Mm-hmm.
That's where people should keep their eye open, is just have an account on Amazon Japan. In general, it's a good thing to have, because there's a lot of things that come out.
Tons.
You can only buy from them. So.
All right, Paul, don't release this episode until I can get on Amazon Japan real quick.
And then we'll just edit this part out.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, Arnie, did you ever get the TurboGrafx Mini? Yes.
It was purchased on July 31st, 2021. All right. No more pussyfooting. Compile. So, just to give a quick rundown, and Ilya, you'll fact check me here if I fuck up.
I will not. You said you're always right. Whatever you say is
I was
set in
testing
stone.
him. The man is on his feet. He understands. He's listening. He's paying attention, Paul. Now, if only I could get a certain co-host to do the same thing.
Yeah, too bad.
So Compile, Japanese video game developer, founded in 1982 by Masamitsu Mu Nitani. Is that even anywhere close to correct?
You nailed it.
Yeah, that's right.
10 out of 10. Even the Russian judge.
Never from the Russian judge. Nitani stated that he did not start Compile with the intention of making video games. Rather, the company was intended to make business software. Surprisingly, this did not go very well. And so he quickly pivoted to video games, which I think we're all very thankful for at this point. He said they really struggled in the beginning of the company, and I'm very glad that it didn't fold right then and there, as I think a lot of companies would have.
Yeah.
So in '83, with the release of the Famicom, the MSX, and the Sega SC3000, which what a fucking banner year for early video games, huh?
Yeah.
Jesus, I thought we were spoiled for choice now. Imagine when all these things are coming out. But obviously, these 3 systems come out. Compile's like, let's make some video games, man. And for the first 4 or 5 years of their existence, Nitani was the only full-time employee, which I was blown away by. He did have some part-time staff. It's not like he was coding by himself in his underwear at 3 a.m, just blasting out hit after hit.
You don't know that.
Yeah, he might have.
He might have.
I mean, fair enough. He probably was. Let's be honest. So he ended up borrowing development software tools from companies that he contracted with, that he worked for. So he began developing games for the MSX, and Compile is very well known for all their MSX releases, and the Sega SC-1000 and SC-3000. Some early titles: Safari Hunting, Borderline, Hustle Chummy. Not sure how that one goes, but I love it.
I know, right?
I love the name of it. I looked up some gameplay footage. It actually looks like pretty dope. And Lode Runner, which, I mean, who doesn't love Lode Runner? Right?
Yeah, that's a known one.
I think Lode Runner is probably the only one of those I've actually played.
Yeah.
I mean, I looked up Safari Hunting, and it's one of those. It really is of an era, man, where it's like, I can kind of understand what's happening here if I really like sit and watch this long enough. But this is a lot. Like there's things happening all over here. And so if you're wondering why it seems like they really focused in on the MSX and the SC-3000, 1000, Nitani sort of explains that these two systems were very similar, so it was very easy for them to develop for one and then port to the other one. I think that helped keep costs low, and obviously you get double the audience, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're just making MSX games, if you're just making SC-3000 games, you're sort of stuck there. But if you diversify, if you're good enough to port from one to the other and make it playable and make it good, you get a much larger audience than you would otherwise. So, that's sort of the early days. And once they start going, they start developing, they start finding success. They developed a lot of series, and like notable games that I was not aware of, even outside of the shooter genre. Obviously, the biggest being Puyo Puyo, which is still going strong today. It's a Sega property now, but it's blob Tetris. I love Puyo Puyo. I'm very bad at it. It's another game that I'm very bad at, especially when I'm playing against the computer. Just owns me constantly.
We need to do a show where you talk about the games you're good at. And it'll be a swift 10 minutes, and then we're out of here. Yeah. It's good.
It's like Knights of the Old Republic. That's about
That's it.
And a couple bowling games, like Strike Force Bowling and 10 Pin Alley. I was pretty good at those when I was a kid. That's about it.
And this is about the point where I mentioned that I've played Puyo Puyo maybe once in my entire life.
Yeah, dude, me too.
And you call yourself a Compile fan. How dare you, sir?
I just never got into puzzle games. I'm Russian and I barely play Tetris. Yeah. So, I mean.
See, I would ask Paul what his favorite puzzle game is, but I know him. He's going to say some contrarian shit like, oh, Clax. I was a huge Clax guy. Like, huge Clax head from back in the day. I loved it.
Nah, man, it's Tetris. Come on. It has to be Tetris. Okay. If not Tetris, then Super Puzzle Fighter 2 Turbo.
I knew you were going to say that.
Of course you did.
There it is.
I mean, I'm a PC Engine guy, and I barely played Bomberman. So, I mean, it's one of those things where they're great games, and I play them for a while, but I didn't have friends at the time that were that into them.
Yeah,
so we just only played them so much. And I just focused on other stuff. So, I mean, I know them, and I've played them, but yeah, that's one of those things where it's a part of Compile I really just never paid much attention to, even though I know how popular it was.
Yeah. So you never played 10-player Saturn Bomberman?
No, because I never really had anyone else to play it with. I mean, I've played it just by myself.
Yeah.
But honestly, Bomberman's one of those games where it's like, unless you're into being really good at it, it's something you play with others. And if you're not playing with others, it's not the same.
Oh, it's a terrible single-player experience, honestly. Like, it's horrendous.
Yeah. Honestly, if you had said yes to that, I would have found that very suspicious.
Yeah. Love Bomberman.
Like, enough Saturns, enough multi-taps. Like, what was going on here?
But yeah, I mean, Bomberman was one of the Caravan Games eventually when they went away from shooters and they switched to Bomberman. So, I mean, it's great when playing with friends, but I just haven't done it enough.
Yeah.
Also, just to get away real quick, because I think our listeners might be interested in this as I was, because I had to look this up. What are Caravan Games?
What are what?
Caravan Games. Like what?
Oh, Caravan shooters. Yeah, I call them Caravan shooters. Basically, it's just an era in Japan where Hudson Soft and then later Naxit Soft was running competitions, where every year they would have a big competition for a specific game where it was live and everybody would come in and basically play for the highest score. And they called them caravans because Hudson Soft had these yellow vans that went around, with the Big B and Hudson Soft, and they would show up at the events, and they had CRT monitors in there and everything. So they they were called caravans, but it doesn't really have anything to do with the actual shooting games. Really, it's just shooting competitions, that started with NES. This was before the TurboGrafx days with Star Soldier and Star Force, and then later Gunhead and Soldier Blade and Super Star Soldier and whatnot. And before Nax and Soft came in with their own series called the Summer Carnival.
Yes.
Where they had, Spriggan and Nexer and a game called Alzedik. Rekka was the other one. Those are the 4 games that Nax and Soft fielded. But anyway, that's all it is. It's just popular shooting competitions in Japan that were called caravans.
So cool,
what a time
man.
to be alive, man.
I wish there was video footage available. I haven't looked, to be honest with you. So
very little, just in my videos. Like there's moments in my videos where I'll show video footage from those caravans. You can look it up.
Nice.
But there's not a ton.
Yeah. How has nobody, in the age that we live in, how has nobody revived this idea?
I don't know. I mean, it's kind of the progenitor to what we have now with Evo and all those big events. So, I mean, it just kind of grew into something else. It switched from shooting games to, party games, to Bomberman, to sports games, to fighting games. So, I mean, it's extremely popular. It's just in a different format now, and it's online. But if anything, it's as huge as it's ever been. It's just not live. So you miss, or I guess it is live for the people that show up. It's so you don't get that, vibe of having to compete on the spot, versus playing for score.
Yeah.
I mean, we have caravan competitions now that I started on my Discord. We've done a few now.
Nice. And
people love it. Like they come in, we're getting more and more participation. We usually have 40 to 50 people that come in and play.
That's awesome.
And it's a lot of fun where we just play for a week, and it's more a social event at that point, because it's not just a one day, like a few hours. It lasts a few days, and we all get on there and we all share and we post our footage and we chat and we help each other out. And someone will come up with, a new and really cool way that they increased their score that nobody ever thought of, and then they'll share it with everybody else.
Ah, it's awesome.
And the caravan events are a lot of fun, but they've become social events more than anything. Like online social events that we do. And it's been great. I mean, I'm doing more and more of them, and I hope it can grow into something. Although it's not something that is spectator oriented. It's more of like, this is a group just having like a good time together.
Sure. Yeah.
That's perfect. I don't know. Hudson Soft really got into their shit back then. What are these things called? This is the one piece of like video game swag I really want, is Hudson had these branded little things that would measure how fast you could hit buttons.
Yeah, the Hudson shooting watch.
Yes.
The Hudson shooting watch. I just literally had that in my like latest episode that I did where I was like training Timmy, and he was using that Hudson watch to like get faster, like mashing the button.
Oh my God, that's awesome.
Just such an epic brag to your friends.
It really is.
Own them on the Hudson shooting watch.
And I failed. You know what? Like, we should have mentioned this at the top of the show. Ilya, Shmup Junkie's YouTube channel, honestly, is phenomenal. Like, really, from top to bottom. The compile video, I don't know if you were aware of this, Ilya. You released it on my birthday. Thank you very much for the generous gift, because that video is awesome. And I remember I first started watching your videos back when you did the mini reviews, and specifically you were talking about input lag and you'd look at each system and measure the input lag, and that was something I didn't see anybody else doing. And again, I should have mentioned this at the top of the show, but if you have even the slightest bit of interest in shmups, Shmup Junkie's channel is the one to watch, bar none, as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, there are not too many Shmup channels. I mean, there's mine, there's Mark from Electric Underground that's been running it longer than I have, and he's got a really great channel. And then there's Bullet Heaven that's been around forever.
Yes.
That mostly focuses on reviews. I'm kind of like more of a nostalgia channel, where I just love making historical videos and nostalgia videos, amazing shoot 'em ups of the 90s. The Compile Shooters video is a good example, and it's probably the first video I made that like really kind of blew up and did really, really well.
Yeah, because Compile's the best. That's why.
It's pushing like 30,000 views now, which is insane for something I did that long ago.
Yeah.
Not that long ago, several months ago.
Paul already said it, but it's excellent. Not that I used it as a resource for this episode
Not at all.
in any way, shape, or form. But coming back to Compile for a second, Puyo Puyo obviously king dog here. But there's obviously a lot of series we're going to talk about. Some we're not going to talk about. Govelius is one that gets mentioned. Zanac, Aleste. I don't know. I say Aleste.
I know. I've always said Aleste, even though it's wrong.
There's no true pronunciation of it. Everyone has a different way of saying it. I call it Aleste because it sounds the closest to like the way they pronounce it in Japan, which was actually like Aresta with an R. So it's kind of, none of them really have a official determined way you're supposed to say that.
Well, it's good to know that I can't fuck any of these up. So
Aleste,
I'm confident you'll find a way.
So Blazing Lazers, Spriggan.
Spriggan. You got to say it the way Bithead says it. Spriggan.
Spriggan. No, so Blazing Lasers and Spriggan, some of the big ones. Let me just ask you guys before we take our first break here. Paul, I'm going to start with you real quick. What was your first experience with Compile?
Oh man. It was awesome. I'll tell you what happened. So I don't remember how old I was. I'm going to say like 10 or 11 or something like that. And I had a good report card. And so my dad took me to CompuCenter at Yorkdale Mall in Toronto to go buy a game. And I had Golvelius on my mind. Like I was walking out of that store with Golvelius. I had seen it in the display case in the top right or left corner. I can't remember what it is with Master System games, but it had the little purple label, the adventure role playing, and I was I was all about that, right? So Golvelius was the game that day. And so I walked into the store and they had the CRT playing whatever the latest game was. And there was and I saw this intro screen where this ship comes flying out of the background and right at my fucking face. And these words appear above it. And the words, there's like fire inside the lettering that's like ebbing and flowing. And the words were Power Strike. And at that moment, I forgot Golvelius even fucking existed. I was like, I need Power Strike right now. And I was very lucky. Like, I didn't even realize Power Strike was like this limited edition Sega game or what have you. CompuCenter, maybe because it was Canada and not the US, because I think the US it was a mail order kind of thing.
Yes, I believe so.
But in Canada, it was available at retail, albeit, probably difficult to find. I didn't know this fucking thing existed. And we walked out of we walked out of the store with Power Strike. I went home and I was like Millhouse playing Bone Storm. Like the force of Power Strike was like pushing me back in my chair. It was absolutely awesome. And from then on, like you could see from Power Strike the Compile fingerprint in other games, and I gravitated to those games instantly because Power Strike was awesome.
You know what my favorite part of that story is? that you as a child had with Power Strike, from your description, a very similar experience to like Turn of the Century people when they play that movie where the train comes right at the screen.
Yeah. Oh my god, it's gonna hit me.
Just like about to end your life. But I'm glad. Do you still own that copy of Power Strike?
I don't own that copy of Power Strike, but I do own a copy of Power Strike. It was, dude, I kid you not. It was when I first started going back into retro games like 10 years ago or so. It was the first game that I purchased that was old. I still had Phantasy Star, because there's some games you never let go of, but Power Strike was the first one. I went onto eBay and I paid what was then a very expensive price, and which would now be considered a steal, and played it immediately, and the same thing happened. That game's amazing.
And that's the original Power Strike you're talking about.
That's the original, yeah.
Yeah. What about you, Ilya? What was your first experience with a Compile shooter?
Well, I wasn't lucky enough to have a Master System. Not too many people did. I had a friend with one, but, they didn't have any of those kinds of games.
It's very, very generous of you. Very generous of you to call the Master System owners lucky. Not many people would. Most of us were unlucky.
I had a friend who had it because he was a huge Sega guy. But he just didn't have those games. And the MSX was a complete unknown in the US. I mean, I totally missed out on a lot of that stuff that Compile did because it was more Europe and, other parts of the world. It just wasn't a thing. I didn't know it existed. I didn't know what an MSX was. So for me, it was on the NES, and it was Zanac, which came from MSX. And I didn't really know it as compile. I just picked it up as a game, and it was a hell of a lot of fun. Personally, I think it's the best version of Zanac because of the speed. You know, when you play them on MSX, you know, you can see it's there, but the MSX had a lot of limitations. So there's a lot of slowdown. Yeah. You know, it's a little bit painful to play coming from the NES version, which is just balls to the wall. It's so fast. And it's still one of those games where you can just pick up and play and enjoy and get into a zone. It had that great tune, you know, the typical, you know, that Zanac tune that everyone remembers. So just, and I'm huge on music, you know, a big part of Shmups is, you know, that music that gets stuck in your head. So just from the moment I popped it in, you know, that tune, you know, that those tunes that are playing, you just love it. It plays fast. And so Zanac is kind of where I got into that type of vertical, fast-paced shooting game. And I didn't really know it was compile. I didn't care. You know, I was young. I just, this is a really cool game, you know, and I'm enjoying it. And, you know, from that point, I started to look at more that were similar, but not as good. You know, like Star Soldier is a product of its time, you know, and it's revered, and it's a good game for its time. But to me, something like Zanac was probably the peak of Zanac, Gunnac, of what the NES did at the time as far as vertical scrolling shooters go. You know, it left stuff like Star Force and Star Soldier a little bit in the dust as far as technological. But they were obviously influenced by it. You know, those kind of games wouldn't exist without Xevious and Star Soldier and those early games.
All right. With that, we're going to take our first break, and we're going to come back. We're actually going to get into the actual shmups. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this. And we're back talking compile. Got Ilya here, the Shmup Junkie. Got Paul, still riding his mech on and about town. He's chopped the CN Tower in half.
Dude.
And now it's finally...
What did the CN Tower ever do to anyone? It's a beloved landmark.
It's too cool. It's patent infringing on the Space Needle. Only it looks cooler somehow. All right. So we've introduced Compile as a developer. We've talked about some of their big properties that they've released over the years. Now let's actually get into the shmup side of things. Spoiler alert, trigger warning, etc., etc. There will be some light discussion of other games for context that are not shmups on this shmup episode. Please don't yell at me. History is important. Reading is fundamental. But this episode is going to focus on their shooter output. So let's start at the beginning. And Ilya, once again, please don't correct me, but if you feel like you need to share some information that I've not included in this outline, feel free to do so. The earliest shmup I could find from Compile was EI Exa Innova, released in '84 on the MSX. Nitani states that this game is connected to Zanac in some sense. I didn't dig too deep into that connection. It's a pretty simple vertical shooter, though. I mean, from the gameplay I saw, it still looks pretty impressive for what it is. I don't know if either of you have had a chance to play this or watch any footage on it. What about you, Ilya? Do you know about Exa Innova at all?
I certainly know about it, but mostly from research, because again, my weakest point is, the older MSX, SG 1000, just all the very first games he made, because it was not just before my time, but it was a platform I didn't have access to. So, obviously when I was researching and reading about it, I'd look it up, and you can definitely see the DNA, coming from Exa Innova into like the future games, just the pacing of the game and the way it plays. It's not something I spent a lot of time with, honestly, so I don't know a ton about the game besides that it was one of their earliest games as well.
Yeah, it was quite a trip to see it, because once I saw it, after having watched footage of all their later games, I was like, oh my god, this this is the same game.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can see it coming. A lot of the games are so similar. Yeah, you can follow Zanac, Aleste all the way through, and it's like, it'll look, it's the same game, but it's not the same game.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. What about you, Paul? Any input on this? Did you watch footage for it? Have you ever played it?
Oh goodness,
by some miracle?
No. I mean, there's footage available. I had a quick look, but as far as playing, oh heck no.
Listen, if you told me at this point, after all you've told me with your Master System to Turbo Duo to Sega Saturn, if you at some point had told me, oh yes, no, I bought a MSX computer, I found it at CompUSA or something.
Dude, those things were incredibly expensive. I mean, computers in general were just way more expensive back then. But specifically in Japan, like the MSX, the PC-88, they were prohibitively expensive, into the thousands.
But so cool looking, though.
Sure.
And I think that's what you pay the premium for.
For the looks.
Yeah, absolutely.
I missed out. I mean, there's some amazing games on it, and I just didn't know about.
Yeah.
So moving on from Exa Nova, we get into the first big series here, Zanac, released in 1986 on the MSX. The game was re-released for the MSX2 the same year as Zanac EX, which came out later. Featured some improved graphics, extended music. It was then reworked and ported to the Famicom Disk System again in 1986. So we see here in Zanac, I think, early indications of what Compile is going to be about. Not afraid to port, not afraid to rework, not afraid to add content. Like they were really, I think, invested in keeping their properties optimized for whatever platform they were going to be on and fresh for people. They wanted to make sure that if you played it on any of the systems they were available on, you were going to get a solid experience. At least that's the impression that I get. Does that sound right to you, Ilya, as far as what their work was?
I think in general they just took pride in their work, especially when it came to shoot 'em ups. They had, the more they did, the more experienced they became with it. So you could just see that improvement, as different iterations would continue and the hardware improved.
Yes.
That's just how they were. They didn't just want to put anything out. They, especially when it came to shoot 'em ups, they obviously enjoyed the genre and they wanted to do something special with it. But at the same time, they had their way. They had their tropes that they liked the most, whether it was, that sense of speed that you get from a lot of their games, or whether it was the huge amount of weapons, that they, stuff into all of their games, the numbering system, the way you pick up power-ups. They reused a lot of stuff, and it kind of gives you the impression of, oh, they're just reusing assets, or they're reusing the same ideas. It's kind of like the games are similar. But I think for them, it wasn't so much about that as it was they just really liked the idea and they want to just keep building on it. They didn't see a reason to completely reinvent it and do something new up until further down the road, like with Musha and games like that.
Yeah.
I got the impression, I watched a specific Compile history video from a shmup YouTuber, where you include an excerpt from a Nitani interview where he basically talks about the fact that they wanted to continue working within this same genre because his belief was if you continue working at something, you'll eventually become a master at it. And I think that holds true in this case. Like you said, some people think they reuse assets or ideas or things. I think they sort of work at it and improve on it until it gets to that point where it's as good as it can be. I think it works to their advantage to work within a system they already know, right? There's no reason to sort of reinvent the wheel every single time you're going to make a game.
Yep.
And I think it ultimately ended up helping them by creating, solid gameplay experiences.
I certainly think so. I mean, look, people are human beings, right? Sometimes you get sick of working on the same thing. Fair enough, right? But there is something to be said for picking, a job, a skill, or whatever, and sticking to it and getting better at it, even if it does get a little bit monotonous at times. And you can absolutely see that with Compile shoot 'em ups. Like, yes, they do reuse some ideas, they reuse some assets, but it's not, I don't know, man, it's not egregious. Like, it gets better and better, and personally, I appreciated it.
Yeah.
Like, that, sorry to interrupt, Arnie, but like,
no, go.
That, what Ilya mentioned there, especially that sense of speed, even now, when I play a Compile shmup, and it has, they all have them. I shouldn't say they all, I haven't played them all, so I can't say for certain, but like, there are sections where the background speeds up, and the action on the screen does not change really to match it in any meaningful way. But just that background speeding up, it, even now, like, you still feel like, oh man, things are about, shit's about to get real. But nothing really changes. But like that alone, that little fingerprint of theirs is so important to the experience. Outside of gameplay, anything else, just that visual trick. It's so cool, man.
If you add the fact that if you look at most of their games, you also have a very fast ship speed. So even when, so the gameplay itself kind of feels like has a frenetic pace.
Yes.
So you have slower games like Super Aleste, which does have its moments of like, where it's scrolling really fast, but the majority of it is very obstacle based. So you look at Super Aleste and there's a lot of very slow scrolling through most of the levels, but at the same time, your ship is like crazy fast. The action is crazy fast. There's always something going on, like whether it's the background that's scrolling or whether it's the pace of the game itself. You don't find compile games with a very slow ship. Which is very different than, like, say, your Raidens, where, you have really fast bullets, but your ship is really slow and you're like kind of trying to weave through, all these bullets coming in from every different direction. They make your ship fast in the compile games, and I always enjoyed that.
Yep.
Yeah. It definitely makes them stand out from other shooters of the era. Absolutely. So Zanac then was later ported to the NES in 1987, and this is, I think, the version that people in North America would be familiar with. And finally, in 2001, the game was released on the PlayStation 1 as a compilation called Zanac X Xanax, which featured an updated version called Zanac Neo, and 3 different versions of the NES game, is my understanding. So there was like a few versions of Zanac on this disc. I know that you had also mentioned, Ilya, in your video that they did remix soundtracks for Zanac Neo. Is that right?
Yeah, Zanac Neo is a completely new game. It's not like a remix. So yeah, they did new music, new soundtracks, new everything. Typical, it's typical compile. It's a very long game too. There's a lot of stages. It takes a long time to get through.
Yeah.
Typical of a console game, which is why they did that versus, you want to get your value. It's not an arcade game.
Exactly.
But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but Zanac, I think this applies to any version of Zanac you play. It's a vertical shooter. I mean, I looked at several versions of it. Always looked impressive. I mean, there was never really a port that I was like, oh, this one's definitely like gimped. They cut some corners here. It always looked like it felt like it didn't feel like a port. No matter which version I looked at, it was always like, oh, this works perfectly on this system. Like, I can see where they're coming from. Obviously, like Ilya was talking about, fast-paced gameplay is standard. Awesome music, also quite standard from the ones that I looked at. And it was noted for its adaptive artificial intelligence. So basically, the difficulty of the game adjusts according to your skill level, aka your rate of fire and your ship's current defensive status, so how good you are at the game. So for somebody like Ilya, it'd probably be very difficult. For somebody like me, it'd probably tell me to go play something else eventually. But we all have our Sir, please hand the controller to someone directly on your left or right and exit stage left.
I think it was probably the first or one of the first examples of rank in a shooting game, period. I mean, there's really not too many examples of it before that. So I don't know my history quite well enough to know if it was literally the first shooter ever, to have a rank system. But it's definitely one of the very first, and definitely one of the first to implement it in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was,
quite impressive.
A creative idea.
I mean, for the time, when I read about this, I was like, what? Like, in 87? Like, this seems like technology beyond, like, what I would have expected them to be able to pull off them. But, I mean, you can definitely feel it. Like, I feel like, and this is just from watching, I feel like when you watch somebody play it, you can see how the game sort of starts becoming more and more difficult and sort of adapting to them. And then when you see people die and have to restart, it sort of slows it down for them, which, I mean, is great. I mean, if you're trying to get the feel for something, if you're trying to learn how to play a game like this, I think that's a very intuitive way of getting players on board. And then not only making them interested, but keeping them interested.
Yes.
Because I think one thing that happens is if a game is too easy and you just get too good at it, you stop playing it, right? Because where's the challenge? Where's the incentive? You move on to something that's more difficult. So this was I think a masterstroke on their part. It received a generally positive reception. I mean, it's Zanac, like it's good. But I want to ask you guys, and Ilya, I know that you have mentioned that you played Zanac. What did you think of it at the time, and do you think it's still worth playing now? Like, if you're coming back into the genre, you're coming into the genre, is this a game you want to check out?
It's either a game that you should check out or a game that's similar to it that would be worth checking out. I think because even though the game is older, and maybe the graphics are a little bit dated, the effects are dated, depending on where you play it. If you're going to play it on the NES, I feel it's definitely worth playing because it gets the fundamentals right. You don't run into a lot of hardware limitations with it. The game still plays really fast. It doesn't have a lot of slowdown. You can get into that zone and have a really good time with it.
Yeah.
So if you can get past the fact that it's a little bit older looking, it's still fun to just pick up and play for a while and get into a zone playing it. Which is why it's worth it for me, and which is why I still pick it up, in addition to nostalgia. I like the way it plays. I like the way it sounds. It's just fun to pick up and play.
Yeah.
And there's just because there's a modern game that has great graphics, it may not be fun, necessarily to do. So, it's always gameplay first, music second, graphics third, at least in my mind, because that's just how I work.
No, that sounds about right. What about Zanac Neo? What are your thoughts on that one? Is that worth it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really fun game. I mean, if you like Zanac, it's hard not to like Zanac Neo because they're so similar.
Yeah.
And you pick up Zanac Neo and it feels like you're playing Zanac with, just modernized, updated graphics and music. It's
cool.
Equally long. It's got the same feel to it, the way the enemies come in. It's the same power-up system. It's really like someone made a new Zanac.
Yeah.
So it's definitely worth it if you're a fan of Zanac in that kind of game. Some people, Zanac was a bit repetitive. The Aleste games were repetitive as far as the way the stages go. And that hasn't really changed. So it's more about enjoying that type of gameplay and enjoying getting into a zone playing that way.
Yeah. And
whether you like it or not.
Perfect. What about you, Paul? Any experience with Zanac on your end?
Sadly, no. Okay. Maybe I'll splurge one day and get the PS1 Zanac X Zanac and just kind of get the complete experience. That might be the way to go about business. I really wish I had. Especially, these 8-bit shmups, like there's just something special about when an 8-bit shmup just pulls it off, Like with the 16-bit era, I'm not impressed per se when a shmup is really good. I'm more disappointed when one sucks. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But on the NES, on the Master System, the 8-bit era, I'm super impressed when a shmup is really good. And when it's not, I'm like, well, it's 8-bit. What do you expect? Right?
Yeah.
So there's something extra special about these 8-bit ones that are really good.
Yeah, and the fact that you're a big fan of Power Strike, you can't not like it because, Aleste Power Strike is Zanac. It's the same game. It plays the same. They're so similar that if you like one, you kind of like the other. And you'll take right to it because it's virtually the same in terms of how it plays and how it feels.
The only thing that makes me scared is the rank system because I hate Battle Garegga so much. I really do. It turned, I swear to God, dude, it turned me off of the genre for like 2 years. It wasn't until I picked up, and Arnie, you're going to laugh. It wasn't until I picked up a Sega Nomad and took it to my security guard job way back when that I got back into shmups. And I was like, oh yeah, these games are fun. I forgot. Because Battle Garegga just beat the shit out of me. And I was like, nope, we're entering a new era that is not for me. But I'm pretty sure Zanac's going to be more forgiving.
Oh, it is, yeah. And when people think of rank, they think of Garegga and, the brutality that Yagawa brought to it. But, the rank in Zanac is completely different. And, some of the early Aleste games, it really is just about... Because Garegga will never loosen up that rank, not easily. Once you've screwed up in the beginning and you've gotten too far and you haven't managed it properly, there's not much you can do. Whereas with Zanac, as soon as you die, as soon as you lose your power-ups, as soon as, it'll back itself off back to, what it should be at a normal pace because you just died. it's not going to just continually punish you because you started the game really well, you know, and then you suddenly died like halfway through.
Yeah.
You know, so it's dynamic. It's always adjusting itself that way.
So taking a left turn, I would say, from something like Zanac, we come into the Guardian Legend, which is a game. I don't know how to talk about this. Because it is simultaneously one of the most interesting games I've ever seen in my life, and also a horrid abomination that should not work in any sense of the word. This is true black magic that this game works and is so much fun. So released on the Famicom/NES, 88 Japan, 89 in North America, 1990 in the European Union. It's a sequel to the 1986 MSX game Guardic. That's how I'm going to choose to pronounce that. Don't know much about Guardic, didn't look into it very much. But it is labeled, Guardian Legend is labeled a hybrid action adventure / shoot 'em up. Those words do not process in my brain correctly. So when I saw the gameplay, I was like, oh, this is cursed. This is unholy. What is happening here? But to their credit, looks incredibly fun. I wish I owned it. It basically has you controlling the Guardian in your humanoid form on the surface of the planet Naju, also known as the Labyrinth. So basically, this is your action adventure type segment where you walk around and do cool shit like shoot real fast and kill things. But then when you go into Naju's interior, which is known as the dungeon in the game, you become a spaceship, and that's when the shooter elements sort of take hold, and it becomes a much more familiar experience, I would think, for people who have played some, of Compile's games. This one received a mixed reception at the time, and I think I have a sneaking suspicion why. It's just such a weird concept. The fact that it works is impressive, but I could see how somebody playing this for the first time would be incredibly confused. Ilya, did you play this one at the time it released, or is this one you played later on?
Oh yeah, no, I definitely did.
Okay.
Around the NES time, Guardian Legend was an old favorite of mine. And by then, at least I kind of had a general idea of, Compile was. It was right around the Blazing Lazers time.
Yep.
So as soon as it came out and I saw that they were involved, I wanted it. And I personally believe that adding a shooting element to any game automatically makes it better. So.
How could it not?
Hard to argue with this example.
So, you see that in a lot of other games too. All the way up to like Gunlord, if you've ever played that game, or it's like a Turrican style game, but then they threw in these like side-scrolling shooting stages, and it's actually really cool, and it breaks things up a little bit.
Yeah, or Gunstar Heroes, I think it's nice to have the variety personally, if it's pulled off well.
When I saw gameplay footage for this, immediately I was like, Sigma Star, the GBA game. Immediately, and I'm sure this is like I'm sure it is influenced by this in some way. It's like a shooter RPG kind of thing. Yeah. So it has a lot of the same vibe to it. Now, when you played it, since you played it at the time, you were somewhat familiar with Compile. Was this did it put you off in any sense, like this whole blended nature of the game? Like, were you expecting something more akin to what they were doing with shooters? Did you already know what kind of game it was going into it?
Yeah, no, I know what to expect. And I always loved those hybrid type of games. Blaster Master was also one of my favorite NES games. And it's not a shooter, but it also pulls off, different types of gameplay very, very well. And, I was a huge fan of the early Zelda games and, those type of games, whether it was like Crystalis or Willow, so I really enjoyed like the exploration aspect of it. And then on top of that, having like really cool, shooting stages, like to pepper it up. So it kind of breaks it up a little bit, so you still get that adventure game experience, but then you also get like that shooting aspect thrown into it, so for me, it was just a plus because it was just made the game better versus it just being the same thing all the way through, at which point it makes it a little bit more difficult to maintain that level of quality. Like Zelda, the original, is such a good game. It'll just keep you enthralled the whole time until you get through it. But not all games are that way. So in some sense, it kind of gives you this other aspect to the game that it wouldn't normally have. Otherwise it would just be a Zelda clone or some other type of clone, and it would be not as good. Yeah. It would be a cool game, but it's not as good as this was done or not as good as that was done. So the fact that they did that made it unique in a sense, and it made it not like other games, and it made it harder to compare against games that it was like.
Yeah. And I mean, time has proven you correct, because this one's huge cult classic now. I remember a time when this was like on everybody's like NES hidden gems list, like, here we go, it's the Guardian Legend. So time has proven you correct. It was a good game. It should have been reviewed better at the time.
It was right to be on those lists. Like, I remember playing this game when I was a kid as well. I rented it. I wasn't as sophisticated as Ilya. I just kind of saw a game on the shelf and I was like, let's try this. And then I brought it home and I was like, this is such a pleasant surprise. It was amazing. And I played it. I played it all the way through. Fantastic game. And like those games, not all of those kind of like multi-genre games worked as well as this. Like I feel like it was always a bit of a risk to do that. You know, I'm thinking of like, you know, just for example, like Fester's Quest, right? Where you have this really cool, you laugh, I know, because it's ridiculous. It's like a ridiculous concept for a game. But you have like this kind of overhead Ikari Warriors style deal going on, and that was great. Yep. But then you get to these like pseudo 3D dungeon parts of the game, and it's like, what are we doing here? They're terrible. But Guardian Legend, nah, man, every part of it's great. You know, the shoot 'em up sections are great. The overhead adventure sections are great. Sign me up. Yeah.
And I would be remiss if I did not mention the absolute top tier box art on this game.
Yes.
Just,
are you talking about the Japanese release? That box art is amazing.
No, I'm talking about the American release, baby. We're talking
I was gonna say.
We're talking about this is what I was telling Paul, was like, this game is the epitome to me of like NES box art syndrome, where what you see on the box and what is actually happening in the game, nothing to do with each other.
Yeah, exactly. There's just no way to tell from the art, like, what's going on here?
At least it wasn't artwork that turned me off. Like, I didn't see it and go, oh my God, what is this? Like,
Fair enough.
know, it's I mean, not like Mega Man. I mean, I played Mega Man despite the fact of the box art, you know, or Dungeon Explorer, you know. I mean, it's like funny, but
Dungeon Explorer.
I know I have to say it right.
Yep.
I actually like Dungeon Explorer. Believe it or not, Dungeon Explorer is cool because like it has that cheesy aspect to it, like like it's a cartoon drawing and it's cheaply done, but it also doesn't make me go, oh my God. Whereas like Mega Man, I looked at him like, this looks completely ridiculous. Like, what is this? Like, who? Even as a kid, I looked at it and thought, who actually greenlit this cover art? Like, it looks like he's just squatting to take a dump, and he looks like
it's unbelievable.
This is this horrible Tron knockoff. Like, it's just terrible.
They gave the artist. Good. The story is that they gave the artist like less than a day to come up with the art. They just kind of gave him a concept and said, like, there's a guy. He's got a gun. He's in blue. Go to town. And then the guy took it home, had dinner, and drew it, and that's what you get for under 24 hours worth of notice.
He went home, had dinner, had indigestion, went to the bathroom, and that's what you got. This is terrible.
Oh Lord. And so before we move on from this, I know Ilya's take on this, he made it very clear, but I'm going to ask you, Paul. Is this a game? Is this something that we need more of? Do we need more games like Guardian Legend that aren't afraid to like just stick to one lane and will throw in, you know, some gameplay curveballs in there? Like, was this game successful enough that you would say, I would trust somebody else that's not Compile to do something like this? Or is this just like the magic in the air that was that company at that time?
It's so tough to say. Like, as a general rule, I think if you just kind of stick to what you're good at in a game, that's the best way to go. But on the other hand, we have so many examples of implementing this successfully that, you know, most recently, like you said, Ilya, Gunlord, right? So I don't see any issue with giving it a try. I think in general, you kind of want to play games that were developed without fear, you know what I mean? Without thinking of shareholders and focus groups. But that's just me.
There we go. So that's the Guardian Legend. Again, go play it. Buy it. I don't think this one's that expensive.
Not prohibitively so, no.
I don't feel comfortable saying that, but if Paul backs me up, I'll say that.
Yeah,
and if anyone hasn't seen the Japanese cover art for that game, check it out. It is fantastic. Amazing.
Yeah. Very good. Actually good. Not my version of good. So now we're moving on to probably, arguably they're aside from Puyo Puyo, obviously, their biggest, longest running series in their shooter category, Aleste. So the original Aleste, 1998 release on Sega Master System and the MSX2. As we've discussed previously, Paul widely knows that the Master System version was released outside of Japan as Power Strike.
Has there ever been a stronger title for a video game? I don't think there has.
Oh God, no! What's the one, the NES game where the guy's like the sequel? The guy's holding the boomerang.
Oh, Power Blade.
Power Blade.
Yeah, but see, like that's just a blade, right? That's a dude holding. Also, by the way, a boomerang. Like, sorry, but not the coolest weapon. With Power Strike, like, dude, all my strikes are delivered with power. Like, it doesn't get better than that.
Well, what about Power Strike 2?
Well, then it's twice as much power, obviously. I mean, come on, yeah.
That's what I'm saying. So, outside of Japan, Power Strike, in the US, Power Strike's initial release was a male-only limited edition, but it did see some retail distribution later on, allegedly. I wouldn't know. I wasn't there at the time. Aleste as a series saw a ton of sequels and spin-offs. So you got Aleste 2 on the MSX2, that's 1989. Then you got Musha Aleste, which is written out Musha in the outside of Japan world.
Yep.
Which does this acronym actually stand for something? Or they're just trying to be cool?
It does. Ilya, can you remember? I can't remember off the top of my head.
I know it ends with super hybrid armor, multi-unit something hybrid armor. Off the top of my head, I'm like drawing
Mega
a blank.
Ultimate super.
But it does stand
armor.
for something.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I'm glad that's actually functional. It's not just like want to make it extra extreme for the 90s Sega Genesis players. This one I want to stop at real quick, just because obviously it's Musha, and I don't know that we're ever going to have another excuse to talk about Musha. One of the most coveted and expensive Genesis games, and surprisingly received mixed reviews at the time of release. Now, obviously, it's very highly praised for its graphics, its soundtrack, and its difficulty. This is one that I'm curious, Ilya, what's your experience been like with Musha? Have you had a ton of time with it, and what do you think of it?
Musha is obviously a classic. I mean, I think most people's experience is about the same. It definitely wasn't one of the first compile games I played. It was further down the line after Blazing Lasers. And it's such a different game. I wouldn't even consider it. I wouldn't have thought it would be an Aleste game if they didn't name it that.
Yeah.
And I think a big part of that too is compile and they still do. They just wanted to slap the Aleste name on anything they possibly could because it was like their franchise, because people knew it. So it didn't matter what it was about. It didn't matter if it was a totally different concept or a different game. If we can call it Aleste, we're going to call it Aleste. And that's why you do have so much variation in some of the Aleste games and how different they are. Where there is an overlap in certain characters and like the Game Gear Aleste games, but then you have something like Musha. That's completely different. And the only reason Spriggan wasn't called something Aleste is because they couldn't call it Aleste. And the only reason it's Aleste and not Zanac is because they couldn't continue to use Zanac. And that's when they made their Aleste game. They changed the name and created their own and made it into a franchise. But yeah, as far as the game, I mean, I think it kind of blew everyone away when it came out, graphically speaking. I don't name it necessarily as like my absolute favorite compile game. I know some people swear by it. But also a big part of that is they were big Sega guys. They were big Mega Drive guys. That was like the shooter to have on the system next to Thunder Force. So, I mean, if you were a Sega guy, Musha and Thunder Force were your games. And to their credit, I call it a lightning in a bottle game. One of those games where they only have 6-8 months to develop the whole thing. And they get a crack team together and they just do an incredible job with it. Where just everything comes together. They have incredible designers like Kazuyuki Nakashima doing the art design, and everything comes together perfectly, even though it's a short development time, because they've got the right people. They work their ass off. Yeah. And it just hits all the right spots. It was typical compile, technically impressive, awesome music, fast gameplay. It had everything that their shooters normally have, and people just took to it.
Yeah. I mean, hard to disagree with any of those points. As somebody who has not had the blessed opportunity to play it myself, I've watched video of it and drooled on my computer several times. It's just, I mean, some of these games are just timeless, right? Like you can look at them 20, 30 years from now, 40 years from now, 50 years from now, they'll still look just as good. Like there was something about that aesthetic, the music, like the gameplay, everything about it just screams classic shmup. And this is definitely one of those. Paul, do you own Musha? Like, do you want to put yourself out there as a target like that?
No.
And where do you fall? And I want to add this addendum. You are a big Thunder Force guy. You are known as a big Thunder Force head. Where do you fall on this divide that Ilya has provided us here, Musha versus Thunder Force?
I'll tell you something, man. I have never played Musha. It is.
Oh, wow.
It is my. I know, right? Wow. It's my white whale. It's my white whale. Okay. And I'll be honest with you. I kind of. This might sound ridiculous, but I kind of enjoy having video game white whales because maybe one day, serendipity will rear itself and I'll play Musha in a very strange way. And in the meantime, there's tons of other games I can play. But I know of Musha, and I obviously I could play it like on any emulation machine or what have you. But I kind of just like knowing that it's out there and not having played it, and maybe one day I will at the right time, and that'll be that. That's right. If the price wasn't so off-putting, like that's part of the reason why it's a white whale, right? Yeah. Had I played it in the past, 5 years ago, I might have shelled out for it. Like Space Megaforce Super Aleste, that one I rented back in the day, and I kind of wanted to experience it again. So I worked a couple of overtime shifts, and a few years ago I brought that one home, right? Mm-hmm. Very rare that I do that. But for something like Musha, I think I'm just kind of happier leaving it as it is until the right time. Anyway, to answer your question though, Arnie, because I didn't really answer it, I would go with just the Compile, their catalog in general over Technosofts. Okay. Yeah, if I have to pick one, that's the one I pick. I hate saying that, but
we have you on record now.
We do. I know. I'm putting myself out there.
And those are fighting words. I assume you'll be careful where you walk from now on, in case you run into somebody who listens to the show.
Look, here's the thing, man. Technosoft has Thunder Force 4, and Thunder Force 4 is superlative. And the other games that are bookending it are pretty good too. But there aren't any weak Compile games. Like none. They're all either superlative or good. I can't look at a Thunder Force 2 or a Thunder Force 5, which are kind of relatively subpar, and in Compile's catalog. Like, am I wrong in this, Ilya?
Who are you wrong? If you were to ask me the same question that you asked Paul, whether I like Musha Thunder Force more, I said as cool of a game as Musha is, if I had to pick one, I think Thunder Force 4 would probably be my favorite, just one of my favorite shooters on the Mega Drive, period. It's just an amazing game. Yeah. But if you look at the entire catalog as a whole, I mean, Compile was just so prolific. Thunder Force 3 is a phenomenal game, and so is 4. Yeah. And I actually enjoyed 5 as well. 6, not so much. That was later days, and, 2 was decent. But that's kind of like their main franchise, outside of like Hyperduel and some other, good games they've made. They've made some great games. Yeah. But if you're just talking about what's the best Mega Drive shooter, sure, I can say, I like Thunder Force 4 more than I like Musha. It's as good of a game as Musha is. Yeah. But if you're talking about their entire library, I mean, Compile is kind of like the M2 of their time. They made so many games, and they made so many games for other people, that you don't even know about. So it's hard to compare the overall catalogs just for that reason alone. I mean, not even like Irem has the kind of shooting catalog that Compile does when it comes to like console shooters. It's just they made so many damn games, and the majority of them were really well made. Yeah. So, people can say Thunder Force 4 is my absolute favorite, and you can't disagree. That may be the case. But if you're looking at a complete library, Compile just made a lot more games. They did a lot of work.
Yeah. So I'm sure Paul now feels very validated. I saw him smiling as you were talking about how good Thunder Force 4 was.
I couldn't smile hard enough, actually. Yes.
But So now we've entered with Musha, we enter into the 90s. And, up until now, obviously, Compile's been knocking it out of the park. And guess what? Spoiler alert, they're not going to stop doing that, even in the 90s. So we move on in 91 to GGLS, which is a Game Gear game. So now we got all this shmup goodness on the go. And this is, I'm not going to lie, Ilya, as I was going through the catalog, I got to GGLS and I'm like, this is the one. This is the one that's going to be bad. Because this is what always happens. This is what we're like, oh, we got this great series. It's fantastic. Now we're going to shove it into this tiny machine that can't do all the things that we can do on the big machine. But that's not what we're worried about. We're just worried about getting it on there. And of course I was wrong. GGLS is still pretty freaking good. And it's the series, it's the Compile series I'm the most intrigued by, because I love the idea of getting games like this on the go. I feel like that wasn't very common back in the day, and the attempts that were made were, not as good as this. So what's your experience with GGLS, like the series in general? Do you feel like it's worth, revisiting, and is it worth being part of this oeuvre that Compile has put together in general?
Interestingly enough, I didn't own a lot of portables at the time. I had my Turbo Express, which I was playing, a lot of my same games with, but I think I might have had a Game Boy because everybody did.
Sure.
I didn't have, the later color, the Advance, or Game Gear, or I didn't have another portable until the PSP, actually. So I missed out on a lot of things. So I didn't get to play the GG Aleste games until emulation and much, much later. And by that time, obviously, they'd started showing their age. But at the same time, they're very good, they're well put together games. So once I was able to bypass some of the limitations using emulation, it made them a lot of fun. I think they're very well designed. They were designed by the same, core Compile staff at the time. Especially part 2, it's a really cool game. The only thing that bugged me about it when I first played it is there was the limitation of the Game Gear itself, because there was just a ton of slowdown. And it sort of reminded me of a lot of like the older MSX games where it's like, you've got this really cool design and it's a good game, but it becomes a little bit painful to play at times. So I was really, really stoked when M2 released their Aleste collection, because when they did a phenomenal job, and they added the no slowdown option where they just made the games run full speed if you want to play them that way. The GG Aleste games were originally a lot easier than most of their games, and that was on purpose. It was a portable game. They wanted to appeal to a wider audience. But they had a special mode. And when you played in special mode, again, it becomes a lot more fun. It becomes more challenging, and it's more for your typical shmup player. But also on top of that, they have those no slowdown options, which is really cool and fun to mess around with, on top of the GG Aleste games. But honestly, the main reason, you probably haven't gotten into it, was the new game that they came out with, which was GG Aleste 3. That game is freaking awesome. They did such an incredible job with it that it was my favorite new game that I played all of the last couple of years it came out. It's just such a good game. It's worth playing. That you would enjoy it for that alone.
What platform is this on? Because I'll be honest with you, I never heard about it until I watched your video.
You can get it on Switch or PS4.
Okay, and is it standalone, or it's not part of the collection, is it?
It is.
Oh, it is. Yeah, no, it's not standalone. I mean, I think a lot of people wanted them to make it standalone. They were like, well, I already have all the other games. I just want GG Aleste 3, but they released it all together only.
Okay.
So that's the only way to get it. So you'll get both Power Strike games, you'll get both GG Aleste games, and you get GG Aleste 3, which is the new game, which literally was, programmed. You have Kazuyuki Nakashima, again, being the art designer, the same guy who did GG Aleste and Spriggan and Musha. You've got Manabu Namiki, who was, obviously everybody knows his name now, the famous musician who did the music for it. You've got the programmer from Super Star Soldier, who did the actual programming. So, I mean, it's just top to bottom.
It's just murderer's row.
It is without a doubt the best GG Aleste game. Rightfully so. I mean, it was made today, not, decades ago.
Oh man, that's so funny, because I went to Play Asia's website to go buy it. And at first I was like, ooh, that's not cheap. Maybe I don't want to do this. And second of all, in their description, they didn't have GG Aleste 3. And so, and then I was confused. I'm like, wait, I thought it was supposed to be part of this collection. It's not? All right, well, and then by then I got distracted by something shiny and I never looked at it again, right? But now that I know, I come on, man, I have to bring this home. Like, this is not even a debate.
Yeah, I mean, it's got the games you like on it, and it's got the GG Aleste 3. And like I said, being able to play them all with no slowdown was a huge bonus for me on the older games.
Yeah.
I liked it a lot.
And Power Strike 2, which quite frankly, I will never own the original Power Strike 2. So that's a great way to go about that
and
one
fixed.
as well.
And it's fixed, so you're not playing it like super speed on an NTSC system.
Yeah.
Yep. So even when Compile tries to, tie one hand behind their back by releasing things on an underpowered console like the Game Gear for what they were used to working with, they still hit it out of the park. They're unstoppable, people. They're unstoppable. And so then there's Super Aleste, which I think we can skip. Paul doesn't care about that one at all. So Paul, Super Aleste, Space Megaforce, Super Nintendo, Super Famicom, 1992. Tell me about Space Megaforce and why I should mortgage my house to buy it.
I hate to say it, but you probably shouldn't. Like, I don't know Ilya's thoughts on this, but to me, it feels like the Compile game that in a way kind of feels the least like one. There's a lot more interaction with the environment. You're shooting a lot of stones and buildings and so on and so forth, uncovering some power-ups here and there that way. It doesn't quite have the fast scrolling backgrounds of the other games, or at least not as often. What it does have is it has some really cool Mode 7 stuff, right? Like there's one level where kind of the entire level and boss is this floating fortress that scales in and out of the screen. And it really kind of gives this impression of your ship floating around and slowly destroying this fortress piece by piece. There's nothing else quite like it that I've seen. So it has its pluses, and it has, the general kind of Compile weapon system where you get 8 different weapons and you upgrade them. You can choose between different modes for most of the weapons, which is really cool. If you're familiar with Blazing Lasers, a lot of it will look similar to that. But I don't know. I think at the end of the day, I'd rather just play Blazing Lasers, and it's also way cheaper if you want to go with the original version. At least that's my thought on it.
Fair enough. What about you, Ilya? What are your thoughts on Space Megaforce?
I do like Super Aleste. I know like some people absolutely love it, and some people it's just not their bag. It's definitely one of the best shooting games on the Super Nintendo, which didn't have enough of them. It had a lot of good ones, but it could have had more. And they did a really good job with it. But he's absolutely right that it's kind of a hybrid game where it almost feels like a mix between a vertical shooting game and a horizontal shooting game with a lot of, you have a lot of environmental interaction, so there's a lot of slower scrolling. Your ship is still super fast, so the action is quick. But the scrolling is slow. It's also a very, very long game, probably one of their longest. So it's one of those games where you'll enjoy it more if you're more into getting good at the harder difficulties. It's not the hardest game on the basic settings, so it can get kind of like a little bit long and tiresome because of its length. And if it's not that difficult, you're not, as engaged. But it is one of those games that when you play it on hard or one of those higher settings, if you're good enough to do it, it kind of takes on a little bit of a different character and becomes a lot more fun in that sense, because there's a lot more to it. As far as being good enough to actually progress in the game, because it does get quite hard if you play it on anything but normal. But he is right. It's definitely, it's got the flavor of a Compile game, but it's also experimental in that way. And I think, like I said, I personally think it's a really good game. It's one of, it's definitely one of my favorite on the Super Nintendo as far as that's concerned.
Yeah. I mean, where Blazing Lasers is a 10 out of 10, Super Aleste is like an 8, right? It's still an 8. That's still really good. It's just that you're comparing it with the best, right?
Yeah.
And I gotta say as well, they performed some magic with that Super NES. Like when you go from Gradius 3 to Super Aleste, like it's like night and day, man, as far as performance is concerned. I don't know how they did it, but they did it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that game is smoking. I mean, and like I think I'm sure I mentioned in the video too, like they almost did it on purpose. Like they made a point of it. Like they wanted to prove that they could make a really incredibly fast performing Super NES game.
Yeah.
When everybody was complaining about them, when everyone's complaining about it being slow and not performing well, they wanted to show that it could be done.
Yeah. They who was it that put I think this was aimed at Konami, honestly, but he just put them on blast. He was like, yeah, we can do it because we don't suck at making games, is really effectively what he said. Maybe you guys should take some more pride in your product.
It might have been Konami, but it might possibly also Irem when they released, the original Super R-Type and all the slowdown that it had.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of other games that had it too. I mean, some good games. I mean, you look at like UN Squadron, which is a lot of people consider a classic and they love that game, but that game was also plagued with a lot of slowdown.
Yeah.
So it just depends how it was developed. And, that's just not their thing. They want fast-paced, smooth games, and when they can't do it, they're not happy with it. So, and to everyone's credit, I think it was early on that was the biggest problem, because if you look at later Konami games and R-Type 3 by Irem, I mean, they're all phenomenal.
Yes.
They did a much better job. Parodius is excellent. Their Parodius on the Super Nintendo is probably the best version of Parodius Da. So they figured it out, but it took some time. And I think Compile were kind of like those that came in and said, yeah, it can be done.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, get it if you can. If you see it at the flea market for $5, do not pass it up.
Like the thing, I'll tell you something, man. One of the main reasons I had to have it was because I remember as a kid and and then hearing it again the other day for the first time in years. Right at the beginning, when you boot it up, there's a digitized voice, and he says, "Space Megaforce, presented by Toho." And it fucking kills me every time. And I remember even as a kid hearing that and being like, that's ridiculous.
God, so moving from the Super Nintendo, giant install base, had everything you needed, to the Sega CD/Mega CD, much smaller install base. Also in 1992, Compile does Den and Aleste, or Robo Aleste, which I believe is a direct sequel to Musha. Is that correct, Ilya?
It was supposed to be, yeah. And I mean, you can see that it is.
Yeah. I mean, it really does answer the question, what if feudal warlords in Japan had mechs? And I think it does so admirably.
All these animes I've been watching have been lying to me.
Exactly. This one got mixed reviews. And from the footage I've seen, it is different. I wouldn't put it up there with Musha or some of the other ones we've talked about. But I can't help but figure that a lot of this has to do with it being on the Sega CD. I feel like it wasn't, I feel like this was something a bit different for them. And the install base was just so small. This one, I don't think really ever had a chance to be as popular as the rest of the series. What do you think, Ilya? Am I sort of on the right track, or?
I don't know if it was a limitation of the Sega CD so much, because, I mean, I don't think it was that different. I mean, maybe it was, I'm not an expert, than it was just developing for the Mega Drive.
Yeah.
But, I mean, you're right about as far as reach, because there weren't that many people that owned it.
Yeah.
To me personally, I kind of chalk it up to it being later Compile, where they didn't have all the same staff that they used to. Not that they didn't have all of them. I think they definitely put the time and effort into it. I'm sure they wanted it to be good. And it's still actually a pretty good game. A lot of people love Robo Aleste. It's just hard to compete against, you're coming after Musha. So anything but something as good or better is going to be a disappointment.
Yeah.
So when the gameplay's kind of changed up and not quite as different, when some of the backgrounds are a little bit more bland and it's not as creative, as the original Musha was. And when the music, at least in my opinion too, isn't as, as it just completely smoking as Musha was, it was more of a mixed bag. You end up with something like that where, again, it's not a bad game. The gameplay's fun. It's pretty well put together. Maybe it's a 7 out of 10 or an 8 out of 10, but it's not a complete knockout hit. So it kind of got that reputation. It's not my favorite, of the series either, but it's still a decent game.
Yeah. Paul, any opinions on Robo Aleste?
Zero.
Okay.
wasn't a Sega CD guy. I knew people who had Sega CDs, right? Like, we played Dark Wizard and Snatcher, but nobody picked up Robo Aleste back then. So, nah.
I mean, for me, the real sequel to that game to Musha was Spriggan.
Yeah.
Just because of how it looks, and obviously it doesn't play exactly the same. But and then the only reason it's not called Aleste is because they couldn't call Aleste, because they couldn't get away with it.
Yeah.
Like I said, they'll call anything Aleste, so they had to come up with something else. But I mean, if you look at the Mac, you look at the way the game plays, it's definitely got a different vibe, but it's a very fun and very well put together game. It's definitely one of their better games, and I definitely enjoy playing Spriggan more than I enjoy playing Robo Aleste. And it's also a beautiful game. I mean, what they pulled off on a regular CD game, that wasn't a super CD game, was really impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So, my only knock against Spriggan is that it's just probably even easier than it needs to be. Like, even on hard mode, it's a reasonably easy game for the most part, because they wanted to make it really accessible. So, but it's also extremely creative with its weapon system and everything else that they did. So,
Yes.
Spriggan is, it's a pretty popular game. A lot of people like it. I'm one of the people that didn't think that the soundtrack on Spriggan was as good either. It was cool, but it was like hit and miss.
Yes.
Compared to some of their earlier work. That's probably my least favorite thing about it. But overall, otherwise, it's a really cool game. And it's also almost a prototype to Rising's future games with like Sorcerer Striker.
Yep.
With that fantasy motif and the way those games played. So in any case, like Spriggan was kind of important in that way. And I think there's a lot of Spriggan and a lot of future games that I'm sure you'll get into later when we talk about Rising. From those other companies.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt you there, Arnie, but like...
No, go for it.
Just to get... I mean, we're already talking about Spriggan, so let's just talk about Spriggan, because we're here, right?
Fair enough.
That look of it is quite unique, I gotta say. Because, I love the sections in that game where you can see, like, the little tiny people way below you, and they're, like, running towards their ships to get in, or they're running away from the spiders and stuff that eventually you start killing. It has all these little details that I'm telling you, man, for a 16-bit game, or like the waterfall level, like these things look really, really cool. I just had to throw that in there.
No, absolutely. Very impressive for its time. And I mean, to say nothing of, like Ilya was saying, this is 92. 93 is not, it's coming up when Compile is going to start disbanding and some of the other things are going to start happening that's going to slow their output down a lot. So just to finish up with Aleste, you got GG Aleste 2. I mean, you got Power Strike 2 coming out in 93 for the Master System. This one only in Europe and Brazil. It's Master System, so that makes more sense than you would like to believe. And it was the only game in the series designed from the ground up as a Power Strike game. So this one, my understanding is, part of the Aleste series by association, I guess, but is much more tied into the Power Strike end of things. And then GG Aleste 2, also called Power Strike 2 for some insane reason, which is a Game Gear game in 93. And then GG Aleste 3, which, as we've talked about, is on the collection. It was also on the Game Gear Micro in 2020, if anybody remembers that situation. I can't imagine anybody actually playing it on that, but Godspeed.
Enjoy.
The series is still ongoing, insanely enough, with Senjin Aleste releasing in arcades in 2021, and Aleste Branch, which is currently being developed by M2 and looks phenomenal from what I've seen. So I guess I just want to wrap up this whole segment, Ilya, by asking you, we've talked about how good Compile is as a shmup developer. Aleste seems to be, they were slapping that name on anything they could get it on. But overall, the quality never seems to have dipped dramatically. And I just like asking these questions because they're fun. Is this the shmup series of this era? Like, between the 80s and 90s, is this the series that you would consider, like, your personal favorite or the best around when compared to some of the other ones that were going on?
Oh, it's really hard to say because, I mean, there's some really incredible series out there. I mean, you've got Gradius and you've got R-Type, it's not necessarily fair to say, the Aleste series is definitely the most extensive and the most consistent. There's so many of them and they're all good in one way or another. So it's just cool to have, it's definitely the best, least known of the series that needs to be better known, which is why I made, the series that I did. And I definitely think they're the best in terms of accessibility for console gamers. So for anyone to be able to pick up and play some of these games, they are more accessible than an R-Type or a Gradius simply due to their difficulty curve. By comparison, a lot of people can just play and enjoy them.
Yeah, absolutely. Paul, anything to add?
No, just generally in agreement. I think while there may be some shoot 'em ups that I would consider my favorites over the compile catalog, like Radiant Silvergun. I have all day for that game. Thunder Force 4, etc. But as a catalog, as a style, the Aleste series is top tier as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. And I think it's fair to point out what Ilya mentioned that I found to be true is that you look at all these games. I came into this not knowing their catalog very well, and I read about all these games that individually people talk about very highly. Your Mushas, your Space Megaforces, all that stuff. But as a series, as a developer, Compile doesn't seem to get brought up as much in retro circles as IRM, as Konami, as, Gradius, and all the R-Type, all these other development houses, even though, like you said, I feel like these games are the most consistent quality-wise that you would get and much more accessible than some of those other ones. So I'm hoping that a lot of people who listen to this maybe go out, if they haven't already, and play some of these games and sort of, bring that name up a little bit, because they're definitely worth going into and exploring in detail.
Yeah, and I mean, guys like Compile made games for everybody, and that was part of it. They made an R-Type game. It was in the video. They made R-Type for the Sega Master System, the original, and they did an awesome job on it.
So good.
But we're going to head into our second break, and when we come back, we're going to wrap up talking about some of the back-end games from Compile's catalog. So you're not going to want to miss this. We've saved some of the best ones for last, guys. We're back. It's time to talk about some more Compile Shmup goodness.
But Arnie, what's next? Tell me what's next.
Do you really want me to tell you what's next?
I desperately want you to tell me what's next.
Okay. It's a game that Paul's never talked about on this podcast. It is Blazing Lazers, released on the TurboGrafx 16 in 1989, known as Gunhead in Japan. Did not know that it was actually based on a sci-fi movie of the same name. Now I desperately want to watch it.
Dude, we have to watch that movie. We have to stream it together.
We desperately need to.
Dude,
like Mystery Science Theater style?
Yeah,
I'm sorry?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, Arnie, did you see the name of the, rare metal that they're trying to obtain in that movie?
Oh my god, is it unobtainium?
No, it's not unobtainium.
Fuck.
It's arguably better. It's Tex-Mexium. It's like they're out there looking for nachos or something.
You just made that up, didn't you?
I swear to God, I didn't.
I can't remember the last time I saw that movie.
Oh god. Oh, you've actually seen it?
Oh, eons and eons ago. Once I found out that it was based on it, I mean, I didn't originally know either, but once I'd heard of it,
have to.
I mean, it's not like it's readily available, and I can't even remember where I found it or where I saw it. Probably on YouTube somehow.
That's so awesome. I mean, me and Paul, we previously did a TurboGrafx 16 episode, and so we lamented the Blazing Lasers versus Keith Courage debate as far as what the better pack-in would have been for the TurboGrafx 16.
Is that a debate?
I mean,
yeah, exactly.
I'm sure there's one guy that's like, listen, man, you don't understand.
Yeah, the marketing guy that chose Keith Courage.
Chris Colpleen of Retro Hangover podcast. He's the one who desperately wants Keith Courage in as the pack-in, whose wish came true. He's going to yell at me for this.
I mean, it's not that Keith Courage is a terrible game. I mean, it's all right.
No.
It's just it's not the kind of game that sells systems or makes that moves anything.
Yeah, no, it's not that it's a bad game. It's just that when in retrospect, when you look at both of them, there's clearly one that you should have put in this console, and it's not Keith Courage.
Man, our Blazing Lasers discussion is really being sullied by this Keith Courage mention, I gotta say.
Now that I know that it's based on a movie, Paul, my only question to you is this the best licensed video game of all time?
How many licensed video? I don't know. There's some really great other games out there that were licensed too, whatever there are.
But this game is up there.
It's right up there.
Maybe it's the best licensed game that's based on a license that nobody's actually ever heard of or probably seen.
It definitely has that title.
Oh, but obviously, you know, I mean, what is there to say about Blazing Lasers? Would you be surprised to learn that when it came out, people thought it was good? Very good reviews, often considered one of the best TurboGrafx-16 games, one of the best shmups of all time. Kanye West, man, was even talking it up when he announced his one of his new albums was going to be called TurboGrafx-16. He said that Blazing Lasers was his favorite game on the console. There are tweets to evidence this. I've included them here for Paul to believe me when I say this.
Because I wouldn't have otherwise, honestly.
I'd love to know how far he's gotten in the game, like how he played it. Like, you know, I'd love to just have a conversation with the guy, which obviously I never will. But like, hey, how far did you get? You know, what are your memories of it? Like, it would just be cool to hear him ramble about it for like a few minutes, you know, talking about the game and like him playing it.
Listen, Kanye, if you're listening,
right?
I just need about 20 minutes of your time. But I guess let me just ask you first, Ilya. Like, we've talked about a lot of good games, a lot of great shmups that have come out. People love, respect. This one seems to be, to me, from the people I've talked to, maybe it's just the circles I'm around, this one seems to be on a next level sort of thing. Like, superlative all around, just hype on hype on hype on hype. Do you think it lives up to that reputation? Like, is Blazing Lasers that good?
I think Blazing Lasers lives up to being the most important game it needed to be at the time. And I think the reason it's got so much hype is the nostalgia value. Of course, it's a fantastic game, but it's not a perfect game. But I think I said it in my early PC Engine mini review, it was the perfect game at the time and for the time. You know, it's what Compile did with it. Because it was that next step from NES games that we were so used to playing. You know, Blazing Lasers was that first game that was like, wow. You know, it just totally blew all of us away. And that's why we remember it so well. You know, it's just because it was just next level, just things that we weren't used to. You know, we weren't used to most games being that fast and responsive, you know, without any hint of slowdown in them. You know, because the NES just couldn't do that. You know, as great a game as Zanac was, I love Zanac. You know, there are some limitations on the NES. You know, so it played incredible. It looked like nothing we'd seen before. And the music was sensational. So, you know, looking back, you know, am I going to say it's the greatest game they made? Or, you know, I don't know. I think they built upon it. You know, I would say that Soldier Blade is probably a better game than Blazing Lasers. But Soldier Blade would not exist without Blazing Lasers. So it was a game that got me really wanting to play more and more shmups and a lot of other people. So it's got the hype because it was so important at the time. It influenced so many other games, and it was truly good, you know, despite its, you know, few flaws here and there that it did have. And that's why we keep coming back to it, because it's like what we remember. Like, I'll still go back and play it because I just want that experience again, even though, you know, you've played it to death.
Yeah.
Paul, go off, King.
Dude, what's what more is there to say about it, man? Like, I've mentioned it on this show before, but that was the first 16-bit game I ever played. And when you boot it up and you hit start...
What a way to set expectations for a child,
my God, man. And like, when you boot it up and you hit start and that background just super fast scrolls and that music on the first stage, dude, the action is like... For those first like 2 minutes of the game, the action is almost non-existent. They throw like single enemies at you, maybe some like chains of enemies where you know the peons that you shoot really fast and so on. But like, it's not even that strong and adrenaline filled an intro. But it's the music, it's the fast scrolling. I was blown away, and I was like, I have to get a TurboGrafx, so I got a Genesis. But like, look, it holds up, man. Like, Ilya, I think you'll be proud of me. I beat it for the first time 2 days ago. I was like, you know what? We're doing a compile episode. I've never actually beaten this game. I've always gotten to the last level and just kind of said, okay, that was fun. I'll see you again in a couple of years and then play it again fresh, right? But I was like, no, I'm going to be on with Shmup Junkie. I can't be a chump. I actually have to beat this game. And I did. And fuck, man, the feeling you get when you beat that game, like a game like Super Aleste and Spriggan, for example, right? You have infinite continues, right? So if you want to beat it, you will beat it.
Yeah.
Blazing Lasers, you don't. You get 4 credits, and you kind of have to build up a really good run to take a good shot at it, at least for somebody at my skill level.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you do beat it, there's just that extra feeling because you don't have inevitability. And man, it felt great. I ran upstairs. It was bedtime by the time I finished it. Christy was already in bed. And I ran upstairs and I was doing like the victory jog with my hands above my head. And she's like, "Did you beat it?" And I was like, yeah, first time in 30 years. And I'm just doing the victory jog around the bedroom. And she's like, "Are you coming to bed?" And I'm like, "I don't know, man. I can't really do very much with my arms in the air like this. You know, do you mind plugging in my phone and so I can get ready for bed?" And so she took my phone, she plugged it in. She did all the stuff that I couldn't do because I was in victory mode because I beat
because your hands were firmly affixed above your head.
They were permanently affixed above my head. Yeah.
It does feel really good to beat it. You're right. And
yeah.
The ending is really cool too. Like that music during the credits is awesome. So like it's
Pretty
kind of
sweet.
a memorable experience where like you're just sitting there kind of basking in the glow of like finishing it for the first time. I remember when I was a kid kind of going through the same thing and just watching that space and the ship scroll with like the ending and just listening to the music all the way through is kind of, you know, you remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have to say, I mean, it looks incredibly impressive. Thank you, Paul, for blessing my dreams with the final boss, though. That image that you put up there.
It wasn't the final boss. That was
I'm sorry.
That was the second last stage, the bubble level boss. The big skull face, which
yes.
is scary as shit.
Fuck, that was terrifying.
And Paul touched on an important point too, which was that you know, like I said, it's not a perfect game, especially the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
I think if anything, the pacing is a little bit off at the start because it starts out really, really easy the first couple stages.
Yeah.
And maybe that was good. Maybe it got a lot of people's feet wet that had never played, you know, shooters before. And I think that was the intention, you know, but now when you go back to play it so long later, like you kind of have to sleep through the first couple stages besides the nostalgia value because there's not that much action there, you know, before it really gets going after the first, you know, 2 or 3. But again, like I said, the music is there, the percussion and the instruments, like we never heard anything like that before in a game before.
Oh, man. The percussion in that game sounds so good.
Yeah.
And that bubble stage, like playing it on a CRT, like in the evening or in the dark with like the way that blue and the like the pink and orange, just like in the reds glow, like you don't get that on a flat screen TV. Like there's a certain look that the game has, especially that level, like on a CRT in the dark. That's just awesome.
Oh,
you know, I
so
still
cool.
play it for like that way because I remember playing it as a kid, like just sitting in my little corner in the dark and a little CRT and like that bubble stage always looked so good because CRTs have such great black levels, you know, and the two glows. So it just looks so unique.
Yeah.
Man, that's so cool. And speaking of the bubble level, I have never heard music that is so perfect for a level as that bubble stage. The music is so weird and so apt for it. I love it.
Yeah, like if you just try to listen to it by itself, you kind of be like, well, what the hell is this?
Yeah,
like,
what the hell is this?
It's kind of weird, but
but in context, oh yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, obviously it's very evident that you both love it a lot, and I think you hit on something very interesting, Ilya, where when I was talking about how hyped this game is, how much people love it, and you were talking about the nostalgia factor for it, and I think there's a lot of truth to that, because when you're talking about a game that came out on a system like the TurboGrafx 16, like if you were a kid back then and you owned a TurboGrafx 16 and you owned Blazing Lasers, like that was probably the best game in your console at the time when you got it,
probably,
if not for an extended period of time thereafter. And so when you have a game like that, you're probably replaying, and you're getting good at it, and you're getting better at it, and you really enjoy going through it. You start noticing all the little details of it, and just like you build layer after layer after layer of memory and appreciation for something like that and love for it. And I think it really, whenever you talk to somebody who played that game back in the day, that really shines out. Like you can tell that they're, you know, they start smiling, their like voice gets, you know, like they're like, oh yeah, I fucking love that game.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. And I think it's probably a big reason why I try, and I rarely do, like I'll never crap on games or different systems because, I mean, I think all of us are guilty of liking some pretty shitty games. Yeah, we all have, you know, there's great games we love and there's just terrible games that we love, and we love them for, well, you know, all the wrong reasons or for whatever reason. It's just what we had and what we got into at the time. And we have certain memories with it. You know, there are some games that are truly terrible, and I can admit that they're terrible games, but I like them anyway. You but at the same, so, as opposed to, oh, how can you like this game? This is garbage. That's garbage. Like there's value to a lot of these games beyond the game themselves. It's tied into what you were just talking about. So it's more about just enjoying the nostalgia factor and appreciating, others for theirs.
Absolutely. So I guess I just have to ask Paul, as a TurboGrafx Sega connoisseur, not making Blazing Lazers the pack-in game or the Sega Saturn announcement at E3, bigger blunder in video game history.
Yeah, I think it's the pack-in. Yeah, that Keith.
Wow.
Yeah, that Keith Courage pack-in, man. Like that's. I think that one's the tougher one. That's a great question though, and I'm sure other people will disagree with me. That's quite a debate.
And in retrospect too, I mean, it's not like Blazing Lasers was a household name. It's just a very good-looking game. I mean, they could have easily made R-Type the pack-in. It was a launch game.
That was actually
everybody would have been like, "Oh my God, it's R-Type! I got to have R-Type." Yeah. That would have been a great pack-in too. But I have a feeling that they knew it would sell anyway, and it was a very expensive game. It was a more expensive Hue card to manufacture, based on how much memory it had inside. So I just don't think they wanted that expense and to lose those sales. But in retrospect, again, that would have been the smart move.
Yeah. I mean, hindsight is 20/20. I make fun of all these people sitting comfortably 30 years in the future. Had I been there at the time, I would have probably suggested something even worse.
Maybe.
But I understand that.
Pretty not the best. But anyway, keep going.
How about this? How about we do no pack-in game? Then they'll have to buy all the games.
Brilliant.
But moving along from Blazing Lasers and its shiny glow, we'll move on to a quick mention of Zanac. Famicom NES game, 1990, 91 respectively. Pretty standard from what you've come to expect from Compile as far as gameplay goes. Very good music, good visuals. This is all stuff that we've talked about. You know Compile at this point. You know what they got. To me, though, this one felt more lighthearted visually than some of the other games. And I don't know if that has to do with the changes to the American version. I don't know if it's just like the style that this game was going for. It got mixed reviews, but once again, reviews, take them as you will. Now it's been reassessed and people love it. Would you think, Ilya, one of the best shmups on the NES, if we're talking about that console specifically? Like, where does this one sort of rank for you as far as that?
Zanac is definitely one of my top vertical shooters on the NES. It's a fantastic game. And actually, the whimsical nature is purposeful. Zanac is a parody game, kind of like Parodius or, Star Parosier. It was meant that way. Actually, Zanac is a play on Gunhead Zanac. So that's the idea. It's Gunhead Zanac, and it's meant to be silly and funny and carrots and things like that. It was their take on making a silly game, but it ended up being much like Parodius, pretty much just about as good or better than, other games that they've released. It came out later after they had done the other games, so they had an even better handle on the hardware. And yeah, Zanac is a old favorite to go back to and play. Like I said, it's a really good game all around. It's definitely one of the better ones on the NES.
And finally, I wanted to wrap up with Spriggan. We talked a little bit about Spriggan earlier in this episode, but obviously Spriggan being, I think, the second sort of big series that got a lot of entries and stuff like that. There's obviously Sorry Senshi Spriggan for PC Engine 1991. This one I just wanted to mention for the weapon system, because I don't know about you guys, I'm not a huge shmup head. I don't know how unique this is, but this seemed very unique to me. It features a weapon system where the enemies just drop 4 different types of orbs assigned to different elements: fire, water, wind, earth. You can hold up to 3, and depending on the combination you're holding, that determines the weapon that you're using at any given time. The orbs can also be used as bombs, so they serve like a dual purpose. You can switch out orbs, try to get specific combinations of orbs for specific weapons. It seemed really cool. Am I wrong? Did this work as well as I think it did, Ilya? Was this very intuitive to you?
I don't know if I would use the word intuitive. It was definitely unique.
Okay.
It was definitely unique, and it was definitely a cool and fun system once you got the hang of it. But initially, you really don't know what you're doing. I mean, because you've got these different color orbs and different combinations do different things. and you don't know what does what. So it's more about experimentation than anything. So it's playing around, seeing what, and then eventually you figure out what you like, what you don't like, and what you want to pick up and what you don't. So intuitive would definitely not be the word, but fun. But fun and unique would be a word, like once you actually kind of get the hang of how the combinations work. And also, big part of it made the game easier because, again, you can use them as bombs. And there's tons of orbs, so you're able to bomb quite a bit in the game to get out of a lot of situations, as long as you're not dropping something that you want to own. So yeah, it was definitely a very cool mechanic, and once you play on the harder settings, it comes into its own. But very cool, very unique, and it's something that continued like further down into their later games. But this was the first time I'd seen it, and the first time I'd seen them use it. Okay.
Awesome. So then we got Spriggan Mark II, also PC Engine Super CD, 1992. This one, allegedly, this is what I found, is started development as a sequel to Musha, but then did not become one. Has almost nothing to do with the first Spriggan outside of some minor story beats, but nothing crazy. This one, not a vertical shooter. Horizontal shooter. We haven't talked about those a lot on this episode, so I'm interested to know, Ilya, what your experience was with that. How do you feel Compile did a horizontal shooter as opposed to a vertical shooter? And just generally, what are your thoughts on the game?
Mark II is really mixed. A lot of people, there's some people that really, really like it. I don't know if it was anything that I enjoyed all that much, simply because of just the style of the game. It was just so different than anything they'd done before, which is okay. But the big thing about Spriggan Mark II is it's more of a story-based experience as it is a shmup. So, and because it's all in Japanese and there's still no translation for it, you don't really know what's going on. So, it's still got tight controls. The story sequences that they put together were really nice, but it's constantly stopping the game and breaking the game for them talking and, what's going on and what's going on. It's almost like an interactive game on top of a shmup, and you don't know what they're saying unless you speak Japanese or unless you read Japanese. So that takes a lot away from it, where you might have been able to enjoy it a lot more depending on what's going on, where really it's just, okay, there's a bunch of text I have to scroll through, and now I can play again. And it's something that can be turned off, but at the same time, it still kind of breaks and pauses the game. The game was designed around it. So it feels less like a traditional shmup. Some of them were very proud of it. I think it was a well put together game. It definitely had some unique elements to it as far as the weapons go. But it's not one I came back to a lot for that reason. There's a lot of incredible side scrollers out there. For first effort, it was fine, but I'm not going to play this over, your Gradius or your Thunder Force type of games. It appealed to me only to a certain point, I guess.
Just to experience it more than to actually, want to replay it over.
Yeah, exactly.
And over again, because it is a curiosity.
Yeah, my only disappointment was that I always wanted them to make a Super CD game because they did something so incredible with the original Spriggan, which was just a CD game, which is very difficult to develop for. The memory was very, very limited. It was like making a card game, just with more storage. So with Super CD, they could have done something incredible, just truly incredible. And that's what I was expecting. So part of my perspective is more disappointment, kind of like, oh my God, they finally made a Super CD game, and it was totally different than kind of what I was looking for or expected in that sense. I wanted to be blown away by the graphics and, and the effects and everything else that they were doing, because I know they could do it. But I guess by that point they were doing something else.
Yeah, and obviously we will talk a little bit more about what happened to Compile. Just to round this out real quick, there was a sequel to Spriggan Mark II, Spriggan Powered, Super Famicom 1996, not developed by Compile, so we're axing that one, we're not getting into it. Just in general, Paul, have you played any of the Spriggan games at all?
Oh, just the first one.
Okay.
Just based on what I saw.
What did you think of it?
Sorry?
What did you think of it? Where does it fall for you?
It's great. It's unique. It's exactly as Ilya said. It is not intuitive. You're picking up these orbs and you just have no idea what you're getting into. And plus the different combinations, you just don't know what's going to happen, right? It's not like Blazing Lasers. You pick up weapon 3, it shoots out lightning. Okay, you have a pretty good idea of what's going to happen here, right?
Yeah.
These different combinations are very strange, but there is sort of a joy of discovery there, where you pick it up. Oh, okay, that's what this does. Oh, okay, that's what that does. And then eventually, like Ilya said, you kind of settle on a preferred combination. For me, it's generally like generally red-blue. You know, I like red-blue. It has like these the fireballs floating around you that absorb bullets.
Okay.
You know that, but I'm pretty sure everybody's got their own preference.
Yeah, Ilya, do you have a Spriggan combination, like a standard one that you like?
Gosh, it changes based on the level. Like, you know, some levels, certain combinations are good. And then once you get further into the game, there's a really basic looking weapon that's just kind of like your typical 8-way spread shot. That actually ends up being extremely useful on some of the bosses. You can kind of cheese them with.
Nice.
And some other things. There's some exploits in the game that, you know, you can do. So it honestly kind of varies. I end up using what looks cool or what's fun. Or sometimes what's expedient, depending on what I feel like.
Let me tell you what kind of person you are based on your Spriggan loadout.
Exactly, and it does change. Like I said, there's like a boss further down the game. I think it was the fire stage with the lava flowing, where I kind of changed my loadout up completely to that 8-way shot because it serves you really well, like for the second half of the game.
So then, just to round out this entire conversation, we need to get to what happened to Compile, right? And this is the sad part of all these developer
I know, right?
Episodes that we do, because we never do, like, we should just do like Nintendo or something. We should do one that we know has a happy ending.
What are they up to?
Once. What are they doing now? So in 2003, Compile filed for bankruptcy. However, their ex-employees went on to found multiple development studios that are still making games today. Some of them are pretty good. I mean, you got Compile Heart. It's founded in 2006 as a subsidiary of Idea Factory. Nitani actually managed this company until 2012. They're responsible for Paul's favorites like Hyperdimension Neptunia and Record of the Agarest War. We know a ton about these games. I assure you, we're not talking about it because it's not part of the episode, but I'm very smart. They recently entered into a licensing deal with D4 Enterprise to create new games based on Compile properties. Are they the ones that are sort of heading up this like the Aleste collection and stuff like that, or is that somebody else entirely?
Not at all. M2 is pretty much M2 actually owns for the most part some of the Aleste properties now. Like they've been buying up some of the others, so it's M2 bringing in old Compile guys, and the original Compile is not really involved.
Gotcha.
And thank goodness, I can think of very few companies other than M2 that I would want working on this stuff. It makes me very happy.
Absolutely. Especially with how good GG Aleste 3 came out, and you'll see what I mean if you ever play it.
There's also Milestone Incorporated, composed mostly of ex-Compile developers. Best remembered for their shmup titles for some consoles and the Sega Naomi arcade boards. Some things like Chaos Field, Rattergy, Karos, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Like, the shmups have to have the most insane names always. It can't just be like Shooty McBang. It always has to be like some pig Latin word that I don't know how to pronounce. But at least a couple of these ended up on the Dreamcast, which I know is fondly remembered for some of its shmups. So I'm glad that some people can still play these. And then we get to what I think would probably be the most famous of them all, which is Aiding, formerly known as Rising. And Ilya, you've spoken about these guys in your Compile video about their history. I know it featured some ex-Compile employees, mainly those who worked on Musha, such as Yuichi Toyama, Kazuyuki Nakashima, and Yoku Kenichi. So, you know, they also included developer Shinobu Yagawa, known for designing and programming Paul's favorite game that I just found out about, Battle Garegga. Which I was legitimately surprised that you don't like it. One, because I haven't played it, and two, because it not only has one of the coolest video game names of all time, but looks insane. It looks really dope. I've never played it.
I played it on the Saturn way back when. And I kid you not, man, it really soured me on the genre for like a matter of years. I was like, I was like, wow, this is where we're going? Count me out. Because I'm just getting raped over and over by this game. Yeah,
well, I mean, you can kind of chalk that up to more Yagawa than Compile or anybody else. I mean, that was definitely his beast. And I mean, he subsisted on the tears of, defeated players. I mean, that's what he did. So he went out of his way to do that. So it's not surprising. I mean, one of his first games I can remember is Rekka on the NES. I mean, if you're familiar with, not NES, on Famicom, if you can remember that. Yep. So, I mean, between Rekka and Pink Sweets and Battle Garegga, I mean, sadism is his middle name. I mean, that's what he does and that's what he was into. So it's not surprising that it did that to you. It's really, it was at the point where the genre was at such a niche that it was only really, really great players playing it that wanted a serious challenge. And, he took it to him and said, "Oh, you want a challenge, do you? It's going to take you 10 years before anybody even figures out how the rank system works in this game."
There we go. I mean, we don't kink shame on this podcast. So Mr. Yagawa, you keep doing what you're doing. Enjoy yourself.
Oh yeah. He was brilliant, but he definitely catered to the hardcore player. I mean, that game is not for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, they got some notable works in Battle Garegga, Battle Garegga, which is a spiritual successor to Garegga, Bloody Roar, which I did not know at all, and Armed Police Batrider. I mean, it really seems like Rising is the closest successor to Compile that we ever got. Am I totally off base there, Ilya?
Yeah, no, they absolutely are. I mean, a lot of people attribute Rising to Toaplan, but that's actually not correct or not true. Mm-hmm. The original Rising staff were basically, that small handful of, people that went from Compile and created Rising. Toaplan was the company that they were close with. They all knew each other. So Toaplan helped them get started. They provided them with the hardware. They provided them with the boards. Toaplan made it possible for Rising to exist. They made it possible for Rising to make the games that they did. They absolutely deserve a ton of credit. But it wasn't Toaplan employees that came into Rising. It was Compile. And a lot of those early games before Garegga were very much Compile flavor. Like the first games, like the Maho Daisakusen series, if I'm pronouncing that right. AKA Sorcerer Striker, Kingdom Grand Prix, Dimahu, Sokyu Gorentai, all really, really great games, that were pretty much core Compile staff that came over to create those arcade-oriented games that Toaplan helped with. Then, of course, came, Yagawa and, other people that came into it that kind of took them to the next level in terms of hardcore enthusiasts with Garegga and Batraid and Batrider and those games you were talking about.
Yeah. I mean, shit, man. These all sound awesome. All these names sound great.
I mean, though that's a serious catalog of games. I mean, you start with Sorcerer Striker and those Maho games, and Sokyu Gorentai, and then you move into these other classics. I mean, that's quite a catalog. For a developer who wasn't around that long.
I'm a big fan of Sokyu Gorentai. That was one. Way back in the day, I remember seeing it on some hidden gem kind of list, and I was like, "Damn, this actually is pretty good." I haven't played any of the other ones like Sorcerer Striker and so on, but it's as you say, it's quite a catalog.
It's great. Yeah, they have it now on the Japanese PS4, only the Japan shop. So if you are able to download Japanese PS4 games, you can get M2 developed or ported Sorcerer Striker
nice.
For the PS4, and only it's never come out in the US or anywhere else. Unfortunately.
Well, finally we'll wrap up. Well, not wrap up, but this is the last Compile sort of offshoot. Is Compile Maru, stylized to Compile with a little circle next to it. I wasn't sure what the pronunciation for that was. This one was started in 2016 by Nitani himself. Basically, they've only released Nitani's newest game, Nyoki Nyoki Tabidachi Hen, which is a puzzle fighting game inspired by Puyo Puyo. Released on the 3DS, supposed to come out on the Switch. Doesn't look like they're really doing much. I mean, I personally throw my hat in like Ilya with Rising. I mean, that's the true successor right there. Sorry, Nitani, but kind of got away from him, I think, at a certain point. I guess just as a final discussion point, and I'll drive this one to you first, Ilya. Where, ultimately, I mean, you have a extended history with this company. You've played so many of their games. You've looked into them. You've researched them. You've done a video on them. So you've gotten deep into it. What do you, where does Compile sort of land for you as far as, their, with respect to their work for the genre? How do you think they'll be remembered, if they'll be remembered, or what do you think, people need to know about them that they don't already?
I mean, hopefully they'll be remembered just based on the video that I've put together, and hopefully in the future videos that others put together. Yep. And hopefully the future games that they make, because luckily some of them I've been coming back with them too, with GG Aleste 3 and making new games. And I'd love to see more of that. But they're, like I said, they're not a household name like Konami or Capcom. And if anything, they're going to be remembered, and they should be remembered almost as mercenaries, because they didn't only just have an incredible catalog of their own games. but they made so many great games for so many other companies, and they did a good job of it. So they were very much like an M2 of their time, like an early M2, where they just wanted to work and they took on everything. You know, they didn't just make their games. They made games for Sega. They made games for Hudson Soft. They made games for everybody. And not just shooters like Devil's Crush, an amazing game, you know, Alien and Devil's Crush, amazing music, R-Type for the Master System, but they did a ton. So, if anything, they should be remembered as just a company that flew under the radar and made a lot of incredible games that people don't know about because they weren't even credited on a lot of the games that they made. But I think they'll be remembered most for their most popular games. Obviously, they'll be remembered for Musha and Blazing Lasers and Super Aleste and the original Aleste games. And hopefully going forward for like anything future that some of their old staff do with them too, because that would be great.
What about you, Paul? Where does Compile sort of land with you as far as their legacy and your memories with the games, obviously?
Look, I mean, their legacy to me is that particular style of Compile shmup is the one that just appealed to me the most. I think it's the best formula that I've seen overall. Like, there are certain aspects from other games, like I can take, you know, for example, like floating power-ups, I'm not a huge fan of. I don't like having to dodge power-ups because I don't, you know what I mean? It seems counterintuitive to have to dodge this thing that is ostensibly good. So not too big a fan of that. I like Thunder Force, where you can pick the different weapons, or Radiant Silvergun, for example, based on the situation that you're in on the fly. You know, there's all these different systems, all these different aspects, you know, like Darius Burst with the little dude that floats around with you and you kind of aim him wherever you need to. There's all these little aspects from all these other games that I like, but just as an overall cohesive whole, look, there's just nothing like the Compile games, man. That style it will endure forever as far as I'm concerned. I can go back and play Blazing Lasers and Super Aleste and Power Strike. Even Power Strike, an 8-bit game, man. That game still holds up as far as I'm concerned. Maybe it doesn't perform great. Maybe you have slowdown. Fair enough. But then you just pick up a collection on a modern system and you can get rid of that and enjoy what is a great game that was made freaking over 30 years ago. So, you know, that's kind of where I stand with them.
It's so heartening to see that they broke off and they've continued doing what they love. They continue doing it at an extremely high level. They're still, you know, Rising is top of the line in this genre, in this industry, as far as I'm concerned. So I'm glad that even though it had to end at some point, as far as Compile was concerned, that the vision and the devotion to this genre is still going on and moving forward. I guess let's just end it the way we end all these friggin' episodes. Ilya, what's your favorite Compile game?
Well, I would say my nostalgic favorite is always going to be what we talked about, which is Blazing Lasers. Whether it's the very best game they made or not, you know, like I said, it's when people ask me a favorite, it's usually, what do you play the most? You know, it's like, so they ask you, what's your favorite PC Engine game? Well, it's Soldier Blade because I play it the most. You know, is it the very best one? I don't know, but I love it and I play it the most. And that's kind of like the game I like coming back to. But that being said, my favorite style of Compile game is their older style of games, like Blazing Lasers and Backwards. So, you know, I love Power Strike 2. I love Gunneck. Just that type of, you can get in the zone, just frenetic, keep going type of action. As much as I love Musha and Super Aleste and some of these other games, I just love their older style of game. Like, once they got past that point of early hardware where, you know, there was a lot of slowdown and all these other problems where they could just make the game that they wanted, for the most part. So yeah, aside from like Gunhead would be the one I play the most, you know, and again, I love Gunneck, I love Power Strike 2, just that type of game.
Are you hoping that M2 tackles some of those? Like, now that they've done this Aleste collection, they've shown like how good it can be. Is there a particular game or series that you're hoping they bring back?
I know that they're very much planning on making more Aleste games like they've been doing because they own the property and they want to make the most use of it. So, you know, they won't all be the same. You know, Senjin Aleste is pretty much a bullet hell. It's not like, from what I've seen, it's not like the other Compile games, which is fine. And the other Aleste game that they're working on, Aleste Branch, looks more like a Battle Garegga type of offshoot, from what they're going with. I don't know if it'll be exactly like it, but the person that's programming it is a Battle Garegga super player. So it may go in that direction, so not every Aleste game is going to be like an Aleste game. But I know they're going to continue to release collections. I know they want to release an Aleste MSX collection with the MSX games and Aleste Gaiden and Aleste 2. And of course, everybody wants to see Musha and Super and all those games on a collection again. Every time a collection comes out, it doesn't have Musha on it. I don't care. That's all they're waiting for. So I know they're going to do it sooner or later because it's kind of like the crowd pleaser. But I love to see new games, like as long as it's being worked on people who kind of like are the old staff. So as much as I'm looking forward to some of the new Aleste games, it was GG Aleste 3 that blew me away the most because it was the one game that literally looks, feels, and plays like all those older games. It's like you just picked it up, decades ago and started playing it. Like it's just, it's got everything. It's, you play it and it's like you're playing one of those old games again because it was made by those guys. It wasn't made by someone that's trying to make a tribute to them. It literally was designed and made by some of the same guys who, worked on those games. And that's why it turned out the way it did. And we're not going to have that forever. The guys are going to get old and they're going to have to stop. So I'm going to enjoy it while we can.
Yeah. Paul, favorite compile game?
Look, man, as much as Power Strike is a nostalgic tidal wave that carries me away every time I boot it up, it still has to be Blazing Lasers. It just does. Like that game, it has everything that I want. It has the nostalgia factor, it has the gameplay, it has the challenge, it has me running through my house with my arms in the air. Like sorry, it just is. I don't even know why I said sorry. Fuck that. Blazing Lasers totally deserves to be my favorite.
And Paul knows me. If a game really hooks me in a sense, then that's what it is. No matter how weird it looks, it's got to be Guardian Legend, man. I have to get my hands on that thing.
Yeah.
And play it for myself. There's nothing else that's on my mind right now except playing that game because it looks so cool and weird. But that about does it for us, folks. We did it. We got through it in less than 7 hours.
Wow.
Ilya, thank you again so much for taking the time out and joining us to talk about all this stuff. It's been an absolute pleasure and honor.
Dude, I appreciate it.
Please plug yourself and all the stuff that you're doing right now. Let the people know where they can find you.
Well, it's been great being on your show, and thank you. But yeah, if anyone is really into the older style of shooting games, like I said, my channel is Shmup Junkie. I am a Shmup Junkie. I have a Discord with over 500 people on it now that are all joining in. We have caravan events. Like I said, my videos are positive. I try to keep a fun vibe with everything. My videos are generally family friendly, except for the occasional, weird porno shmups kind of episode. But yeah, like I said, I just have a lot of fun on my show, and I do a lot of historical stuff too. So like history of compile shooters, I have one for, the history of R-Type. I'm going to be working on a lot more coming up. So I have a whole history of TurboGrafx and PC Engine, 2 videos that I did that came out great that I was really, really happy with.
Okay, but when is the history of Choaniki coming out? Because that's what I want to know about.
Well, I did feature Choaniki in that weird Shmups video, I'll tell you.
Yes.
There we go.
That I did. But yeah, that definitely will be an interesting one when that comes around.
I'm gonna book you for our Choaniki episode right now.
But I kind of change it up on my show. It's a lot of shmups, but I also just get into our arcade games, arcade style games. Like I did a huge review of the Capcom Arcade Stadium. I just recently did a really popular episode that just blew up. I think it's almost to 30,000 views already. It's only been like a couple weeks.
Wow.
Which is huge even for my channel. Which basically just arcade exclusives, like the best arcade exclusive games that never got a home port, that you've never heard of, that you've never seen, that are awesome.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah.
So like, just really cool games that like, what's this? Why haven't I heard of it? It looks amazing. Like nobody's played it or heard of it because it hasn't come out anywhere. That one did really well. So stuff like that.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. As far as us, you can find us on Instagram at Region Free Gamers Podcast. You can find us on Twitter at Region Free Gamer. You can find us on Discord. You can find us on Patreon if you want to support us. If you enjoyed what you hear, please feel free. If you can't support financially, something's going on, don't worry about it. Just join the Discord. Leave us a review on iTunes or wherever it is you listen to podcasts. And just keep on listening, man. Show everybody.
And I got to add, too, Linktree /Region Free Gamers.
Yes,
that's where you can find all those links, including the link to our Discord. Patreon, Instagram, etc., etc. Linktree/Region Free Gamers.
Beautiful. All right, Paul, as you slowly exit your mecca in the smoldering ruins of downtown Toronto, I like
Toronto,
we did our job
dude. Just
here.
because I moved away doesn't mean I hate Toronto. I don't know what's going on here.
Yeah, I've been thinking about moving to Canada. I'm okay with that. It's all right.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.